This is Atomic Shinobi and today I'm going to narrate first part of what if Naruto discovered Yondaime's final secret. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Always wasting no more time, let's start the story.
The ease with which the scroll had been taken simply astounded him. When he arrived, there was no one there, even though he knew that it was typically guarded by at least 4 Anbu. All he could think was that Mizuki had assured them that they could take the night off and that he could use it. Since he had already arrived at one of the training grounds, there was no way to go back now. He began searching through the many jutsu after he unrolled the scroll. He reached the end of the scroll's writing after a few minutes. He discovered what appeared to be a puzzle that contained instructions for a vault. He began copying it down in a spare scroll, thinking that perhaps there was something useful in the vault. After he was done, he rolled it up and placed it in the pocket of his pants. After resolving that, he went back through the forbidden scroll and selected a few of the more intriguing sounding ones. However, he understood that he would most likely only have time to learn one before someone arrived to train at the training grounds. He began to practice the scroll's first jutsu. It took him several hours to hear the sound of ragged breathing behind him. It was even louder than his, and it had come so abruptly that it startled him. Sweat streaming down his face, he turned around grinning. Iruka was standing there, panting and staring at him bewildered. "Oh, hey Iruka. Sensei, how's it going? I just finished up learning one of the jutsu in the scroll, so if you want you can train with it yourself. There are some really awesome ju." Iruka used the head expansion jutsu he had learned to discipline misbehaving students to blast Naruto in the face, saying, "Just what in Kami's name do you think you're doing?" Iruka was, to put it mildly, agitated when she asked, "Why the hell did you steal the forbidden scroll? Do you realize that every ninja in the village is after you because of what you've done?" But, Iruka. Sensei, Mizuki. Sensei said that if I was able to take the scroll and learn a jutsu from it that I would be a genin. So that's what I did. I've already got one jutsu down, so that means that I'm a genin now, right? When do I get my Hite.8 Sensei? Can we go get it now? Naruto asked with some anxiety. They heard someone say, "Oh, they'll give you your Hite.8 alright, but only right before they put you in the ground," from that direction. Iruka was taken aback by the hate in Mizuki's voice when he asked, "Mizuki, what is the meaning of this? Do you really plan on betraying us? What would you have to gain from this?" As he stood on a tree branch and spun a big shuriken. He hurled the spinning shuriken directly at Iruka, saying, "You have no idea Iruka, I have everything to gain from this." Naruto watched in horror as the events unfolded before him. Iruka had a distressed expression on his face as he leaned over him. The shuriken was embedded in his back, though it was difficult to see. "Iruka. Sensei, why didn't you dodge, why didn't you get out of the way?" Iruka coughed up blood, which spattered Naruto's frightened face. "Because Naruto, if I had, you would have been hit yourself. As your teacher and as someone who cares for you, I didn't want you to get hurt." Mizuki was laughing uncontrollably now, not caring if anyone heard. That's the biggest load of bullshit that I've ever heard. Iruka doesn't care about you, nobody cares about you, they all hate you. The village hates you, even the Hokage hates you. No, that's not true Naruto. I care about you as if you were the little brother I've never had, I could never hate you. Mizuki couldn't help but laugh at it, saying, "I'll tell you why everybody hates you Naruto. They're afraid of you, of what's inside you. Keep spouting out that crap, Iruka, and you might actually convince him of that someday, if you live that long that is." As Iruka frantically attempted to stand up and remove the shuriken, she said, "No, Mizuki, don't tell him, it is forbidden." Desperate to understand what they meant, Naruto exclaimed, "Wait, what's inside me? Why aren't I supposed to know? Tell me." Iruka threw the shuriken back at Mizuki just as she was about to speak, but Mizuki caught it after easily sidestepping and dodging it. Naruto had begun to back away and was now nearly to the opposite side of the clearing, shaking his head and crying. "I'll tell you why. It's because all those years ago, the Kyuubi wasn't killed. It was sealed away inside of a newborn infant. That baby was you Naruto. You are the Kyuubi," Naruto said. Naruto had begun to flee when Mizuki threw the shuriken he had just caught back towards him, saying, "Now die, demon." Naruto took off after dodging behind a tree. In an attempt to resolve the situation, Naruto flew through the trees. Everything was beginning to make sense. He was the demon in human form, which was why the villagers had mistreated and neglected him. He heard branches crashing behind him after what felt like hours of him jumping from branch to branch. In an attempt to stop his labored breathing, he leapt to the forest floor and sat on the outside of a tree on the edge of a clearing. In the clearing, he heard 2 people land. The familiar voices said, "Just give it up Iruka, he's gone and he's taken the scroll with him." The demon will use the scroll to destroy the village, and there is nothing that you can do to stop it. Naruto heard Iruka defend him, claiming that he wasn't the demon that everyone seemed to believe him to be. No, you're wrong, I believe in him, he would never do anything like that. He was just a young child, hurting and lonely. Iruka was crying as Naruto sat behind the tree and listened to him defend himself. When he looked up, he saw a familiar set of red eyes staring at him after hearing a faint rustling in front of him. They blinked once, then turned, and as it departed without a sound, he could see the bushy white tail protruding slightly from the bush. Mizuki threw his final shuriken at Iruka, saying, "Oh please, he's nothing but the monster inside him. And for protecting him, you will die first." Suddenly, without even flinching, Naruto appeared and caught the giant shuriken on one of the blades. "I will tear your fucking head off if you ever attempt to harm one of my precious people again," he exclaimed, lifting his head. If one looked closely, they could see a pair of red eyes staring at Mizuki, though it was difficult to tell in the darkness. He pointed at Naruto with his right hand and began to laugh, saying, "Like you could do anything to me. I'm a chunin and you're just an academy student. You don't even know how to catch a shuriken without getting hurt." Several things occurred simultaneously. A tree fell to Mizuki's left, Naruto abruptly vanished from in front of them, and his raised hand sent a shockwave through Mizuki. He collapsed to his knees and let out a painful scream. There was nothing but a bloody stump where he was holding his arm when he looked down. "What did you do, you bastard? Where are you?" The words, "Right here, Teme," caused Iruka and Mizuki to turn around, and they saw Naruto standing above the clearing on a tree branch. Mizuki cried out, "You cut off my hand. I'll kill you." He raised his hands in what would soon become his signature cross and exclaimed, "Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Just try it, I'll send anything you do back 1,000-fold." Suddenly, hundreds of Naruto clones appeared on the ground and in the trees surrounding the clearing. "Get ready, 'cause here I come," echoed around them. Thud. Smack. Crack. Snap. "No, get away, ah." Naruto left Iruka at the hospital and Mizuki at T&I before making his way to the Hokage's tower accompanied by Anbu. The Sandaime instructed them to let him keep the scroll until it was given to him directly. The look in their eyes told him that they were sneering at him the entire way there, even though he couldn't see it through the masks. How come this brat is given preferential treatment? The ANBU's general reaction upon learning that not only was Mizuki getting away with his crime, but that he would actually be promoted for it, was, if it had been anybody else who had taken the scroll, they would have been locked up in T&I with that traitor Mizuki. Naruto believed he saw the gleam of something made of glass vanish beneath the desk as they entered the Hokage's office. He put the forbidden scroll on the desk and said, "Hey there Gigi.san, I brought your scroll back for ya," without giving it any thought. One of the ANBUs began, "Watch your mouth, boy, show proper respect T." Hiruzen calmly said, "That will be enough, Anbu.san. I can take it from here, you may leave," and raised a hand to silence him. After giving Naruto one final look, the Anbu shinned away and said, "Hi, Hokage. Sama." Ignoring Naruto for the time being, Hiruzen examined the scroll to make sure it was undamaged before placing it under his desk. "Now, Naruto.kun, why did you go along with Mizuki without even asking another teacher if what he had told you was true? You surely aren't naive enough to just believe whatever anybody says. A ninja must see through deception," he said, turning to face Naruto, who flinched under his stern gaze. He was nervous at first, but by the end he was back to his normal self with a big smile on his face. "I'm sorry Hokage. Sama. I just wanted to be a genin so bad that I was willing to believe him. Trust me, I'll look before I leap next time, believe it." Sigh. "Okay Naruto, just be more careful from now on. Remember, you and the rest of your class will be gathering at the academy to be split into teams. It starts at 2 o'clock, so you better get some rest and change before then. You are dismissed," he said with a grin on his face. Naruto hardly controlled his joy as he left the office, attempting to stop himself from yelling and embracing everyone he saw. "Thanks for reminding me, have a good day Gigi.san, he said. He cheered and leapt in the air as soon as he left the building, drawing everyone's attention and earning glares from the majority of them. Unconcerned, he continued to cheer and began running home, drawing a few yells from onlookers warning him to keep quiet or face arrest. But today, nothing could bring him down. "I am now a genin, at last. That implies that I'm getting closer to becoming Hokage." As he walked away, Hiruzen watched him from the window. "Shoki.san, could you call the hospital and ask what room Iruka Amino is in?" Hiruzen called to his secretary. "Nothing can keep you down for long, can it, Naruto.kun? Naruto, I only hope that whatever you took from that scroll wasn't harmful." It could be disastrous for Konoha if some of the secrets within ended up in the wrong hands. When Naruto returned to his apartment, he discovered the word demon and some rather offensive language spray painted on and around his door. He sighed and mentally noted that he would repaint it the following day. Recalling the last time the door had been left unlocked, he unlocked it and then relocked it. Naruto was awakened by a drunk who had broken in, relieved himself on him while he was sleeping, and then passed out on top of him. Since then, he had, of course, remembered to lock the door. After taking a shower and eating a quick meal of ramen, he changed and decided to take a nap because he had been practicing all night. He collapsed into bed after tossing his old clothes on the ground. He went home to try to make up for the sleep he had lost the night before after being assigned to Team 7 and informed about the test tomorrow. He stepped on an empty bowl, slipped, and fell while trying to find the light switch after locking the door behind him and removing his sandals at the door. A shard of it went into his foot after he broke it by stepping on it too forcefully. For a while, he sat in the dark, tending to a bump on his head and attempting to stop the bleeding in his foot. With the light off, he was unable to remove the shard, which he realized he probably should. With a grimace, he located the light switch and a pair of tweezers and took them out, telling himself that this pain was nothing and that he had experienced much worse pains in the past. When he got to work, he was careful not to put too much pressure on his foot, but by the time he reached his bedroom, it didn't even hurt when he put weight on it. He thought, man, I really gotta clean up around here, I definitely don't want that to happen again. He saw a bulge in one of the pockets of a pair of pants while he was loading his clothes into the washing machine. As soon as he pulled the forgotten scroll from his pocket, he recognized it. After leaving the laundry behind, he returned to his room, sat down at the little desk, and switched on the little reading light. He opened it and read the Forbidden Scrolls message again. Anyone reading this should be aware that I am probably dead and that you will inherit my estate if you can figure out the puzzle and get into the vault. The Yondaime. He was shocked to discover a covert message that the 4th Hokage had left behind. What on earth did he mean by the vault? He continued. When everything is painted red and your pals are considering going to bed. Examine the soul of the head of the Flash. The first 2 lines are fairly simple. It must be sunset when everyone is thinking about going to bed and the world is red. Kami, what do the other lines mean though? What kind of Flash has a head or a soul? When the light goes out, you have to share your power. Be mindful of the paper and ink. Otherwise, there won't be any more fights. Other than the end of the light, none of that made any sense. But why should I be afraid of paper when that's just reiterating sunset? From the combination of red and yellow bleeding orange blood is necessary. Inside, you'll discover the instruments to replace us. He read what appeared to be a bunch of bullshit and was about to throw it away when he realized where it had come from and who had written it. Yeah, red and yellow make orange, but I've never heard of orange blood before. Maybe it comes from some kind of special jutsu. Naruto put the scroll away and went to bed, trying to understand the meaning of the whole thing, his head still spinning from trying to solve the riddle. He was getting out of bed, eating breakfast, and getting dressed in his jumpsuit when he realized where he was meant to be. Oh no, I'm late. Kakashi Sensei will kill me if Sakura doesn't. After putting on his coat and clutching his Hite.8, Naruto bounded out of his apartment, saying, gotta run. He began to recall how he received it yesterday as he was tying it to his forehead. I'm proud of you, Naruto, you've finally proven that you're ready to be a ninja. Now close your eyes, I've got a gift for you, said Iruka. Naruto did, and his forehead soon began to feel comfortable and familiar. You can open your eyes now. When he physically and literally ran into someone, it jolted him out of his reverie. As he got up and started to leave, he said, great, I don't have time to waste with any bigots right now. I really need to get going. Sorry pal, I don't have time for a fight right now, I'm in a bit of a hurry. So if you don't mind, stay the hell out of my way, he said. N. Naruto.kun. Naruto turned to see that the individual he had encountered was, indeed, a Hyuga heiress. He offered to help her back up and said, oh, sorry Hinata, didn't see ya there. Her face only became extremely red as a result of this action, and she brought her fingers together. She was startled out of her anxious thoughts when he said, well, are you gonna get up or do you plan on sitting down there all day? She swiftly stood up with his assistance and said, right, I'm S. Sorry for making you wait. And Naruto.kun. She seemed to be really happy for some reason. She looked down to see that she was still holding onto his hand, which was the reason she was happy. Hinata, can I have my hand back now? As I said, I'm in a bit of a hurry. Her face was even more red, if that was possible, as she backed up a few feet and let out a "eep." She twitched her index fingers together in front of her. Naruto waved as he hurried away, saying, okay then, see ya later Hinata. She was behaving like Sakura whenever Sasuke speaks to her, so what's up with her? In any case, it's most likely a girl thing. He was relieved to see that Kakashi had not yet arrived as he approached the location where they were to meet. He was nursing the second bump on his head that he had received in the previous 12 hours. Hey guys, I apologize for being late, but I kind of woke up late. Ya see, I hadn't gotten much sleep the night before last and I guess my body was trying to catch up. Anyway, I was up for about 2 hours trying to figure out this really circa ow. Hey, Sakura, what was that for? He said. I don't care why you're late, Baka, just get here on time next time. Now Sasuke, what were you saying before Naruto interrupted? Sasuke made Sakura swoon. Knowing that he would receive another blow to the head if he didn't apologize, Naruto said, oh sorry. Anyway, what were you talking about? Sasuke put his hands in his pockets and turned away, saying, forget it, Dobi, it doesn't concern you anyway. Sakura was prepared to attack the blonde. Shaw, now look what you've done, you've put him in a bad mood, and she said so. As if to tease them, he puckered his lips and said, what, were you two planning your future together or something? Sasuke smirked as he turned to face Naruto and said, not at all, Dobi, we were just saying how if we get sent back to the academy, it will definitely be your fault. Naruto rolled up his sleeves and glared at Sasuke, saying, oh yeah Teme, you wanna say that again? I don't speak emo. Sakura, on the other hand, couldn't stop imagining how she would appear standing next to Sasuke in a wedding gown and how he would look in a tuxedo. However, when they heard someone speak, they were forced to stop what they were doing. Seeing the looks they were all giving each other, he sighed, this isn't going to be fun. Yo, sorry I'm late guys, but a black cat crossed my path and I had to take the long way here. Okay, settle down everybody. Sakura complained, hoping that she could get Naruto removed from the team early on so that it would just be her and Sasuke. But Kakashi. Sensei, Naruto started it. He was almost as late as you were. Kakashi raised an eyebrow in surprise and said, I see. Well then, he's already started out better than you two. The three of them gave him a startled look. Sakura was just perplexed at this point, but Sensei, shouldn't he be punished for being late? Sakura simply put on a pout, while Sasuke quickly fixed his expression and averted his gaze with a frown. Normally, yes, but a ninja must see through deception, and I was deceiving you when I told you to come that early. Naruto simply flashed his trademark silly smile. It was just to make you weaker and make this test more difficult. She said, by the way Sensei, what is the test anyway? With a curious expression in place of her disappointed one. Oh the test is to see if you can get these bells from me before this clock reaches noon. Kakashi pulled out an alarm clock and placed it on a nearby stump. He held up 2 small bells on strings and said, whichever one of you doesn't get a bell, will be sent back to the academy, and will be tied to one of those posts, and not allowed to eat lunch. Naruto began to laugh at them, saying, so that's why you told us not to eat breakfast, too bad for you guys, I already ate. They gave him a glare in return, then glanced down at their just growling stomachs with pain. Okay, we'll start when I say. Kakashi rolled his eyes and said, okay, we'll start when I say. When he said that, they all became serious and prepared to leap off. Begin. Each of the 3 of them took off in a different direction into the trees, off to a bad start already. When he looked up a few minutes later, Naruto was standing on a little hill at the edge of the clearing. Alright, just you and me. Kakashi hadn't really expected any better from him when he said, you know, ninja are supposed to be stealthy, not openly declare themselves to their enemy and challenge them. He apparently ignored the blonde genin as he took out his Icha and began reading. Then 10 Narutos appeared, all charging at Kakashi. Whatever, like that matters, I'm gonna kick your ass and take one of those bells from you anyway. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Kakashi leapt into the air and landed a few feet away just as they were about to get to him. When they collided, they emerged from the pile they had entered. Once more, they charged him. This time, he was seized from behind as he was ready to leap away. You're mine now, exclaimed the Naruto to whom he had been grabbed. His arms and legs were seized by the other clones that approached from the side. I'll knock you out and take that bell from you. Sakura hid beneath a bush and observed the entire conversation. When did Naruto learn to make shadow clones? I thought that it was a Jonin level technique. However, he pulled his arm back and leapt off Kakashi's head just as Naruto was about to punch him, causing it to briefly poof back into Naruto before vanishing. He vanished into a nearby tree's branches. Sakura and Sasuke watched in confusion, trying to figure out what had happened. However, they didn't have to wait long because Naruto was launched back out as soon as he vanished into the branches. Then, without getting hurt, Kakashi leapt from one of the branches and grinned at Naruto. I should have switched with a log instead, so he wouldn't have been able to jump off it like that. Very good, Naruto. Not only were you successful in creating multiple shadow clones, but you were able to use them as a distraction. Then, you were able to think quickly on your feet, and adapt to the circumstances. Unfortunately, you'll need to be even quicker if you want one of these bells. When Naruto's body struck the ground, the clones were all dispelled. He just lay there, apparently unconscious, as he skidded to a stop. After a few minutes, Kakashi became a little concerned and began to approach him. I must have hit him harder than I thought. Hey, Naruto, are you okay? Okay guys, time out. Looks like I hit him a little too hard. I'm gonna have to take him to the hospital. Well, he may act tough, but he can't take a punch at all, was the general thought of the other two. Sakura, who didn't care about Naruto, thought this was the ideal opportunity to spend time with Sasuke. Making sure to remain hidden, she leapt off to find him. He wasn't trying to hide from her, so she quickly located him. She squatted on the branch beside him and edged closer to him as she said, Hey, Sasuke-kun. Now that Naruto is out, we should work together to get those bells. 2 bells, 2 of us. He leapt to a new hiding place and said, No thanks, you'll only get in my way. Naruto was being picked up by Kakashi, who had approached him. After a few steps and holding him in his arms, Naruto opened his eyes and snatched one of the bells hanging from Kakashi's belt, just inches from his hand. He shouted, Ha, I knew it would work, as he leapt away from a surprised Kakashi. Kakashi looked at him in utter bewilderment and said, But, I could have sworn that you were out cold when I picked you up. I read all of your vital signs, and they all pointed to you being unconscious. He added, in a barely audible whisper that only Kakashi heard, Yeah, over the years I've perfected the art that is, playing a possum. I've had to if I wanted to survive. He immediately put on the big smile once more and turned to face Kakashi, asking, And man, did you fall for it? Naruto simply began laughing, showing no signs of his previous melancholy. So sensei, what do I do now? There are still a few more hours until noon. He paused after a minute or so and turned to face Kakashi, grinning broadly. Sakura and Sasuke were bound to posts a few hours later, while Naruto ate on the ground while a stunned Kakashi stared at him and did not touch his food. Never before has anyone been able to take one of the bells, much less by himself. He might one day realize his dream if I train him properly, so I had better keep an eye on him. Alright guys, I gotta go do something really quick. I'll be back in about 15 minutes. Naruto, don't let them go and don't let them have any food. I'll be right back. He shunned away in a puff of smoke. Let's hope he can pass this next test too. Naruto had had enough of his constant stomach rumbling after about 5 minutes. Sigh. I'm not that hungry anyway. You guys can have some of my food, as long as you guys promise not to tell sensei about it. Sakura's expression showed relief as she said, Really, thanks Naruto, maybe you're not so bad after all. Does that mean that you'll finally go out with me, Sakura-chan? Asked Naruto as he stood up and began feeding Sakura. Sakura yelled, Cha, not in your life Naruto, baka. He turned away from Sakura and was about to feed Sasuke when he heard a thud behind him and saw a terrified expression on Sakura's face. Ah, you just called Sakura-chan. A furious Kakashi was glaring at him when he turned around. Ah, Kakashi. Sensei, I was just Kakashi had stooped to stare Naruto in the face and said, Well, you were just breaking the rules, just to help your teammates. Do you know what that means? Naruto had backed up against the middle pillar and exclaimed, Gulp. N.N.O.W. What? It means, you've passed. Everyone else's expression changed from one of anger to one of joy. They were all briefed on the value of teamwork in a subsequent speech. They untied Sakura and Sasuke. Sasuke turned to face Naruto and Kakashi and said, Okay then, that about wraps it up for today. You two can head on home now. I need to speak with Naruto for a few minutes. He wondered if he would be receiving special training because he had actually received a bell. When did you cease to be the deceased Naruto? When Sakura glomped him and drew him away in an attempt to persuade him to go on a date with her, he was startled out of his reverie. With a curious expression on his face, Naruto asked, Nay, Kakashi. Sensei, what did you want to talk about? He looked worried as he noticed a tiny frown form on Naruto's face and his eyes grow icy. Naruto, what did you mean when you said that you had to learn to fake unconsciousness? He asked. He looked down, trying to avoid the pitying gaze, and said, I don't want to talk about it right now. And I don't want your pity. Naruto turned away as his fists began to shake as Kakashi approached him and said, You know, it's not always good to bottle up emotion like that, despite the fact that you're a ninja. Follow me, I have something I want to show you. he said as he approached the memorial stone. On this stone are carved the names of heroes who fought and died for this village. The names of my closest friends are engraved here. When his friends were mentioned, Naruto looked up at Kakashi, who now had a very sad expression on his face. The last name caused Naruto's eyes to widen. My father, my friends Obito and Rin, even my sensei, Minato. He died saving the village, died sealing the 9 tails inside of you, as you were told recently. I know some people may blame you for his death, but I see you as a hero. Sensei? Naruto asked, his eyes welling with tears. I realize now, that instead of all the time that I have spent staring at this stone, trying to keep my emotions from spilling out, wishing that I would have had more time with everyone, especially Rin. He began to weep. I know you're hurting inside, Naruto. You may try to hide it with grins, but I can see it in your eyes. Your soul is scarred, and it's all my fault. I should have been there for you, that's what Minato Sensei would have wanted, and it's what I should have done from the start. Can you ever forgive me, Naruto, for not being there when you needed me? He said, turning back to face Naruto when an unexpected incident occurred. Naruto then embraced him and began to cry. With tears in his eyes as well, Kakashi gave him a hug in return and said, "Thank you, Naruto." After successfully completing their first mission the following day, which involved delivering a number of letters and packages throughout the village due to a shortage of personnel at the post office, Naruto, or rather, the others were practically coerced, decided that they would travel to Ichiraku, with Kakashi covering the cost. As they got there, Naruto yelled to Tucci, "Hey old man, got some customers for ya." "Yeah, Ichiraku has the best ramen in the world, can't be beat." He emerged from the rear of the store, wiping his hands with a cloth, and said, "Oh hey there, Naruto, I see you brought some new faces. What are your names?" She bowed and said, "Sakura Haruno, pleased to meet you sir." He turned to Sasuke and said, "Happy to meet you too, now who are you?" He just sat there looking at the wall and said, "Sasuke Uchiha." The raven-haired boy's behavior had made him tense, but seeing Kakashi made him feel better. "Okay then, moving right along. Wait, I know you, is that?" "No, it can't be. Kakashi Hatake? It is? My, you've grown up. Haven't seen you in years, what y'all been doing?" "Oh, nothing much, just being a ninja. By the way, how's that daughter of yours doing? The last time I saw her, her head didn't even reach the counter." Ayame had just emerged from the rear when she heard her father speaking to an old friend. "I'm doing fine, thank you very much," she said. "Who are you anyway? You look familiar but I can't quite place it." Kakashi had taken her hand and kissed it through his mask, making Ayame blush, before Tucci interrupted, saying, "Alright. That's enough Kakashi, none of that Chan stuff. I know how you were with the ladies, I don't want you getting her hopes up. I'm Kakashi Hatake, I used to come here a lot with Minato. You always tried to get me to take off my mask and sneak peek at me when I was eating. My, you have grown up to be quite the beauty, Ayame-chan." Team 7 simply stared at Kakashi throughout this entire exchange, each of them thinking of something different. Sasuke questioned why Kakashi was discussing the Yondaime as if he knew him. Sakura was now interested in what was behind Kakashi's mask, and Naruto questioned why Tucci and his sensei appeared to be such close friends. When Tucci gave them instructions, they were all roused from their reverie. After placing his order, Sasuke was the first to ask, "Kakashi. Sensei, I have a question," waiting for Kakashi to nod before continuing. "How exactly did you know the Yondaime?" he asked. He ignored Sasuke and Sakura's shocked expressions and remarked, "Oh, that. He was my sensei." Kakashi. "Sensei, how do you know old man Tucci?" was Naruto's next question. "One of my fellow teammates, Obito Uchiha, loved ramen almost as much as you do Naruto. After he died, Minato and I kept coming here with a good friend of Minato's, who also loved ramen." With the mask gone, Sakura said, "That's so cool sensei. Could you tell us more about him, please?" She was curious about the Yondaime's private life because the library didn't have much information on it. Kakashi inquired, "Who? Minato, or Tucci?" "Minato of course. Not to offend Tucci, but it's not that exciting that you know him," she replied. "I suppose," Kakashi replied, rubbing his cheek. "Well, as you all have probably heard before, the Yondaime, Minato Namikaze, started out as an only slightly above average ninja, graduating from the academy at the age of 10, whereas I graduated at the age of 5. You don't really expect us to believe that you were a genin at 5, do you?" Sakura said. They all looked surprised when he said, "Yes, I do expect you to believe the truth. Not only that, but I was a chunin by age 6 and a jonin by age 13. However, this was soon replaced by a smug expression on Sasuke's face, which read, "If he's really as good as he says he is, then he's the perfect person to help me get strong. It's all true. I was the one he went to for the celebration of each achievement. I still can't forget how silly and cute you looked with your miniature Chunin vest on." Tucci chuckled. Kakashi, disregarding Tucci's comments, went on, "His sensei was the famed Sannin, Jiraiya the Toad Sage. If it wasn't for Jiraiya seeing the potential in him, he probably would have never made it past the rank of Chunin. From him, Sakura was beginning to come around. Yeah, sensei, we know that already, tell us something else." He muttered something about Haruno women who are unsure of when to stop talking. "All right," he said. He continued prior to her asking him what he said. After becoming a Jonin, he took Obito, Rin, and Ion as apprentices. He really showed his skill during the Third Shinobi World War, where using his own technique, the Hiraishin no Jutsu, he became known as the Yellow Flash, because of his speed and that the last thing someone saw before he took them down was a flash of his yellow hair. He tried to teach it to me, but I just never got the hang of it, and now, without knowing where any of his special kunai are, there's no way to copy the seal to actually attempt it," he concluded, hoping it would satisfy him. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Sakura said, her face displaying annoyance. "Kakashi. Sensei, you're just saying more things that any ninja worth their salt knows. Tell us more about his personal life." Naruto interrupted, saying, "Meh, Sakura-chan, I didn't know any of that stuff." Sakura screamed, "Shut up, nobody asked you, baka," and struck him over the head before noticing that everyone had stopped what they were doing and was staring at her curiously, with the exception of Sasuke and Naruto. She crossed her arms, turned to face Kakashi, and said, "What, the baka annoyed me?" Loudly enough for everyone to hear. "As you were saying?" she asked. Knowing why he didn't want to discuss Minato's personal life, Tucci hurried the orders, saving Kakashi from being questioned by Sakura. "Right, well, I don't think that I should really be talking about his personal life. Oh look, ramen's ready." Kakashi was relieved. Sakura turned her questioning eyes to Tucci when she realized he was not going to reveal any more details. "So, you said he visited this place often, what can you tell me about him?" "Sorry little lady, I don't know much about him. Besides, even if I did, I wouldn't tell you. Customer. Patron confidentiality, Yasi." Tucci, who was far more composed than Kakashi, told her while maintaining a straight face and avoiding eye contact. "Fine then, keep your little secrets, ya bunch of geezers, they're probably boring anyway." Sakura gave up with a huff. She turned to face Kakashi and saw that Ayame was staring at him yearningly. She then looked at Kakashi and saw that he had just finished putting his mask back on after eating. Naturally, this caught the attention of the other members of Team 7, who had been wondering, "If you won't tell me about the Yondaime, then tell me, sensei, what are you hiding behind that mask?" He began to examine Sakura, attempting to envision her appearance in 6 years. "Sorry, Sakura, I don't think that Sasuke would appreciate me stealing one of his fangirls away from him. Besides, you're too young to start chasing after me. Now maybe in a few years," he said. She saw that he was glancing at her and said, "All right, then, I understand why you don't have many friends, sensei. And stop staring at me, you pervert," she yelled at him. When they were done eating, Kakashi instructed them to proceed to the training grounds while he settled the bill. After bidding each other farewell, they left for the training grounds. While Tucci was withdrawing his money, Kakashi lingered to speak with him, saying, "I trust you haven't told him yet about his parents." No, I'll wait until he's told by someone else, or figures it out on his own. He doesn't need to know that until he's old enough. I just hope that when I finally die, the red-hot habanero doesn't beat me too hard for not taking better care of him," he replied with a chuckle. They all went home a few hours after training, which included several near misses when Sakura attempted to use a kunai to cut open Kakashi's mask. But Naruto took a different turn, heading for the Hokage monument. Something clicked in Naruto's mind the moment he heard Kakashi refer to Minato by his nickname. "Kami, I really hope that I'm right." He arrived at a spot where he could see the sun clearly just before it was going to set behind the trees. The Hokage's faces were illuminated by the last remaining rays of light, which was gradually fading and moving down the cliff face. Just as it was ready to exit the Yondaime's eyes, it struck at the perfect angle and in a sufficiently dark area that, for roughly 5 seconds, a beam of light reflected off the eyes, guiding him to a spot he couldn't see other than the south-east corner of the village. Yes, I was aware of it. Perhaps that light points to a map with the vault's location marked on it, or it may lead to the entrance to the vault he mentioned. I might be able to organize a trip to the vault. That would be awesome. Regardless of whether anyone could see him, Naruto had begun to dance a little jig. A voice behind him said, "Hey, Blonda. Why are you dancing like that? You got ants in your pants or something?" A small child was standing there, staring at him, when he turned to face it. He wore a scarf around his neck that was nearly twice as long as he was tall, and his brown hair was held in an odd way by an odd cap. "Meh. What does it matter to you, kid?" The child's disdainful expression stopped him in his tracks. "Great, and I thought I wouldn't get this sort of treatment from kids," he said. He must have heard his parents say, "Just stay out of my way. I gotta get home and rest. I could get called away on special ninja business at any time." He remembered to look around the area the light had pointed to after training and left for his house. "Hey, don't act like you're better than me," the child said, leaping in front of him with a distressed expression. He began to move around him, saying, "Look, kid, I really don't want to be bothered by you right now, so unless you want to fight, get out of my way." "Oh great, I was hoping that he wouldn't press it." The child turned and attempted to swing at him as he was walking by. After a few seconds, when he didn't see Naruto move at all, he became a little concerned and said, "Hey, are you okay? I didn't hit you that hard, did I? Don't just walk away. I'm Konohamaru Sarutobi, grandson of the Sandaime. You're not that tough if you couldn't even dodge my punch." It appeared to connect, sending Naruto sprawling to the ground. First rule of the shinobi: move through the shadow, conceal your movements from your opponents until the time to strike. Naruto said as he pushed Konohamaru's head into the dirt. Suddenly, he felt his hands being grabbed roughly and pulled behind him, pushing him into the ground. He glanced back to where Naruto had been lying and saw the shadow clone poof into smoke. But how did you? When did you get behind me?" he asked. He had released Konohamaru and moved away from him, his eyes never leaving the child's. Rule number 2. Never underestimate an opponent, nor overestimate yourself. "But if you really must know, I used a substitution jutsu to switch with a shadow clone I had made when I was walking past you." "Well, I'm not going to fall for that a second time," cried Konohamaru, who was now trembling with rage, as he ran towards Naruto with his fist cocked back to punch him. As Konohamaru was about to strike him, Naruto grabbed his arm and spun him around, pulling his arm in a painful position behind his back. "You're right, you won't?" Naruto reached into his pouch and drew out a kunai, bringing it close to Konohamaru's neck. "Do you know the punishment to those ninja that break those rules during a mission?" he asked, shaking his head, being careful not to let his neck touch the blade. "I'll tell you then." He leaned in close and whispered into his ear, "The punishment is death." Rule 3. Never give your opponent an advantage over yourself. As the glint of metal approached, Konohamaru began to perspire and snivel, tears welling up in his eyes as he said, "Pages please, don't hurt me. I page promise, I'll never do it again, I swear." "Haha, I was just kidding, kid. You're alright for a brat," Konohamaru exclaimed as he was abruptly shoved away. Confused, he turned to see Naruto smiling down at the boy while putting his kunai back in his pouch. "Honorable grandson, where are you?" A voice called out to them both, making Naruto stop grinning, and they noticed Ebisu round a bend in the road. With a look of relief, he said, "Ah, there you are, Konohamaru sama." He squinted when he saw Naruto standing there. He turned to see Konohamaru covered in dirt and scrapes, tears streaming down his face as they dried. He turned back to Naruto, who was now frowning, and said, "He didn't hurt you, did he, honorable grandson?" If he did. Then he looked back at Konohamaru and saw that he was shaking his head. He looked at Naruto and said, "Stay away from the honorable grandson. I don't want you infecting him with any of your bad habits." He took Konohamaru's hand and began to walk him away. "Well, we should get back anyway to get those scrapes patched up. Hurry, before the D-Dog boy infects you with his stupidity." Just before turning the corner, Konohamaru turned to see Naruto staring at the ground, motionless except for his fists, which were trembling uncontrollably. After finishing the morning mission and spending the majority of the afternoon training, Naruto was moving quickly the following day in the direction of the village's southeast corner. As he leapt from rooftop to rooftop, he thought, "I'm just glad that Kakashi let us away early, because I might just be able to get there in time to see where the light leads." However, he had just jumped over an alley when he noticed a disturbance there and stopped. Using a technique Kakashi had taught him only a few hours prior, he turned around, knelt, and brought his eyes over the edge, sending chakra to his ears to improve his hearing. When he began to understand what was being said, they twitched. Someone was surrounded by 3 robbers with knives down below. Although he was unable to identify the individual, he could see that it was a young girl. One said, brandishing his knife as though he truly knew how to use it, "Okay, girlie. Hand over that expensive-looking jacket of yours, and all of your money too." Naruto recognized the insignia on her arm as he watched her remove the jacket from above. "Hinata." He silently created a dozen shadow clones and instructed them to disperse. His gaze refocused on the alley beneath. After counting the money, the boss was now examining Hinata to see if she had any jewelry. When he couldn't find any, he became aware of her developing body and said, "Say, why don't you take the rest off, and we'll have a little fun?" Hinata retreated and raised her hands, shaking her head and breaking down in tears as he approached. The other two simply stood there, licking their lips and laughing. The robbers turned to see a silhouette standing at the end of the alleyway with the sun setting behind him. "Hey, ya perverts, shouldn't you at least buy her dinner first?" they all said. However, they felt remorse for that action because they had inadvertently stared directly into the sun, which briefly blinded them. They all heard multiple thuds around them, though, so they didn't have time to react. Before they knew it, they were all lying on the ground in heaps, unconscious. Dispelling his shadow clones, the real Naruto approached them. He kicked them lightly a couple of times to make sure he hadn't killed them, then turned to find Hinata huddled against the wall, trembling, her arms wrapped around her in terror, her eyes screwed shut. Hinata was lost in her own imagination. She stopped hearing anything and didn't even notice the newcomer once she realized what they were going to do to her. She waited for the pain as she lay there. She expected a rough touch, but instead she felt arms gently encircle her. She opened her eyes in surprise and saw a burst of blonde hair. Through her tears, she was unable to identify the person, but she could see their mouth moving without hearing a word. She had obviously not noticed him yet when Naruto leaned down to look at her. She didn't answer or even indicate that she had heard the question, "Hinata, are you okay? They didn't hurt you, did they?" When he saw how much pain she was in, he thought of all the times he had experienced something similar. He had hoped that someone, anyone, even just one person, would support him, pick him up, reassure him that everything would be okay, and give him a hug during all of those times. Aware of this, he moved in closer, putting his arms around her in an attempt to console her. "Hinata, are you all right?" he repeated after noticing that he had finally received a response from her. When Hinata understood why she was blind, she raised her hands and wiped away the tears. When Naruto noticed that she was no longer crying, he tried to comfort her by smiling at her. Blood rushed to her cheeks as she saw his beaming face inches from hers, and everything darkened. When Naruto noticed that she had fainted, he became anxious but stopped when he noticed that she was starting to smile. He picked up her jacket and placed it over her like a blanket, leaning her gently against the wall before returning to the robbers. He went through their pockets and removed any weapons, valuables, and identification. He created 3 clones after tying them up. He presented the ID to them. Cards and a letter outlining the events without naming anyone. Each of the 3 men was picked up by the clones, who then proceeded to deliver the note to the Anbu headquarters. Presuming it was Hinata's, he collected all the money and placed it in the better made money pouch he had discovered. After putting the weapons in his pouches, he returned to Hinata and put the wallet in one of her coat pockets. Then, being careful not to wake her, he picked her up bridal style and left the alley. He was walking when all of a sudden he realized what he had been doing prior to saving her. The stone faces were entirely obscured by shadow when he glanced up at them. He sighed and went on to his apartment, grinning down at Hinata every time she moved. When he got to his apartment, he unlocked the door and laid her on the floor, leaning against the wall. Although he would have liked to have taken her to the Hyuga estate, he understood that if people saw him holding her, they would likely assume he had attacked her. The fact that he didn't know the precise location of the Hyuga estate didn't help either. He picked her back up and went inside after the door had been unlocked and opened, gently placing her on his couch before returning to close and lock the door. Readjusting a strand of hair that had fallen out of place when she stirred, he walked back to her. For several minutes, he stood there examining her features. He had never seen her up close before. Actually, he had always thought Hinata was pretty adorable. Sakura was more attractive, but he had never really seen her face up close. She always wore that heavy jacket, which kept people from seeing her body, and she was always blushing and averting her eyes from his, as if she was afraid of making eye contact. Now that he had a clear view of her, she was indeed stunning. The growl in his stomach jolted him out of his reverie. After rearranging her coat so that it would serve as a blanket, he went to the kitchen and made 2 cups of instant ramen. One for himself and one for Hinata, in case she felt hungry when she woke up. He pulled out the scroll containing the riddle after he had finished his meal and began to figure out the answers. Soon after, he fell asleep with his head resting on the table. Hinata woke up, stretched, and stirred. She had been having a terrible nightmare in which she was being attacked by strangers, but a mysterious knight in shining armor had come to her rescue just in time. She looked around and saw that she was lying on the couch in an unfamiliar apartment rather than in her bed. The sound of her movements roused Naruto, who groggily lifted his head to gaze at her. She recalled everything that had transpired as soon as she saw Naruto. She woke up with tears in her eyes and rushed to Naruto, shocking him with an embrace. He was fully conscious once she had him in her grasp. As he heard her sobbing, a dampness began to accumulate on his shoulder. He embraced her and gave her a pat on the back. "It's all right, it's over now, you're safe." Her tears had dried up after a few minutes, but she was still trembling. She smelled him as she hugged him. Strangely, he had a faint citrus and pine scent, which made her laugh because he always wore orange and smelled like one. She tightened her hold on his jacket and drew herself nearer to him, inhaling his aroma, finding solace in it, and letting out a raspy sigh, her throat still a little raw from crying. Naruto misinterpreted these. She shook when she laughed, and he assumed she was afraid. He heard her breathing and assumed she was trying to get over her sobs. He also felt her pull closer and assumed she needed something to hold onto. She realized she wasn't wearing her coat and abruptly remembered who she had been hugging. With a "eep." She leapt away, twitching her fingers once more as the blood returned to her face. "Hinata, is there something wrong? Are you hurt somewhere and I accidentally touched it?" Naruto asked, looking at her bewildered. She shook her head nervously, never looking at him. "Then tell me, why are you acting like this?" She kept looking at her coat and wished she was wearing it at the moment. It's because, she said. She was shocked and perplexed as she looked at him after saying, "Don't tell me you hate me too." She saw him hanging his head and crying on his lap. Why does everybody hate me? Does this hate run so deep, that even one of my classmates, one whom I had just saved, hate me, just for existing?" She asked. When he struck the table with his fist, she recoiled. Then she saw him snatch up the portion of his shirt that covered his stomach. He lifted his head and stared out the small window at the Yondaime's face, saying, "It's not my fault, it's all because of this damned thing inside me. Why did I have to be the one?" He turned to face her again and saw her staring at him with a puzzled expression on her face. I don't hate you, Naruto-kun. She approached him and sat down in a chair beside him, putting her shyness aside, asking, Why would I ever hate you, Naruto-kun?" He grabbed her shoulders and looked at her beseechingly. "You don't hate me? Then I'm begging you, tell me, why do you always avoid getting near me, acting afraid and jumping away whenever I even brush against you?" he asked. "Well, it's because she began, her face redder than ever. "It's because I love you," she said, a little louder than she intended to, and she put her hands to her mouth, covering it, regretting what she had just said. "What if he rejects me?" she asked, seeing the pained expression in his eyes and realizing that he believed she had just been lying before. "We don't really know one another." Thinking he hadn't heard her right, he said, "You what?" She was on the edge of fainting when she whispered, said, "that love you." Realizing that what she had said was accurate, Naruto simply sat there and thought back on all the times they had ever interacted. He suddenly walked over to her, hugged her, and said, "Thank you, Hinata-chan." He then leaned in and kissed her forehead, but that was all it took for her to lose it and faint. When Naruto saw her head drop onto his chest, he gave her a startled look. But when he understood why she had fainted, he grinned. Making sure she had a pillow beneath her head and that her coat would keep her warm, he pushed her back to the couch. Returning to the table, he was about to pick up the scroll when he noticed the cup of ramen that had not yet been consumed. He rolled up the scroll and put it under a loose floorboard, laughing to himself. In an attempt to sharpen his senses, he decided to review the jutsu that Kakashi had taught him after cleaning up until she woke up. In this instance, Hinata had dreamed that the knight had brought her back to his castle, where he sang her sonnets and performed acts on her that caused her to blush even while she was asleep, ultimately resulting in her fainting in the dream. Naturally, she woke up in her dream rather than fainting, and was once more taken aback by her surroundings before recalling her location. Her yawn and the sound of her clothing shifting like an earthquake were heard by Naruto, who at the time had been improving his hearing. His ears began to ring, but he was unable to stop the chakra flow in time. He spun his pinky in Hinata's ear as he glanced at her. He laughed when she jumped and gave him a blushing look. "Oh, you're awake. How was your nap?" he asked. He yawned and said, "You can stay here until morning if you want." He then got up and went to his bedroom. Naruto-kun? He exclaimed, obviously exhausted. Not wanting to come across as impolite, she blurted out, can I sleep in your bed tonight? Not to impose or anything. He had begun to return to the couch and said, "Oh, sure, yawn. I'm fine with taking the couch." With even more nervousness than before, she said, I actually meant, Would you mind if we shared the bed? Naruto was a little taken aback. He was trying to figure out why she might have asked for this. He blushed at the image that came to mind when she confessed her love for him. No, Hinata is far too nervous to want to do that right now, he said, shaking his head slightly. When I kissed her forehead, she fainted. Then his mind went back to why she had come here in the first place. Yeah, she must be nervous, still shaken up and scared, he said with a slight nod. She will feel safer sleeping close to me, where I can protect her, because she clearly trusts me. Fearing that her request might offend him, Hinata said, Naruto-kun, are you alright? He must have interpreted it incorrectly. He believes I'm a slut now, she thought, her eyes threatening to well up again. When Naruto noticed her crying, he became alarmed and raised his hands in front of him, saying, yeah, I'm okay. Just stop crying. You're prettier when you smile, so be happy. Hinata's face flushed intensely at the unexpected compliment. S.So, you don't think I'm being forward? She asked. No, it's fine. I understand why you need to be close to somebody right now. Hinata inquired, so, I can sleep in your bed? With hope? Sure, yawn. Just let me change into my PJs first. Hinata jumped with a eep. When she heard a growl suddenly fill the room, and she looked around to see what had made the noise. They heard it again, but this time she turned to face herself and saw that it was her stomach, which made Naruto laugh. Hinata blushed and began the twiddling once more. Here, I made this for you earlier, but it's kinda cold now. Naruto handed it to her as he walked back over to the table and picked up the now cold ramen and a pair of chopsticks. Just come in whenever you've eaten enough, he said before entering his room. With a ferocity that people had only ever witnessed with Naruto, she waited until he was gone before gobbling it up. She hadn't eaten anything that day, which was more of an issue than the fact that she loved ramen. After learning that some of the other girls were dieting, she made the decision to follow suit, assuming that the reason Naruto had not previously taken much notice of her was because she was slightly larger than the other girls. He had, after all, always appeared to be pursuing Sakura, the class's smallest member. She completed it in about 30 seconds and threw it in the trash can when she burped loudly enough for Naruto to hear, and she blushed as he began to laugh. After locating the restroom, she removed her mesh shirt, revealing only her bra and undershirt. She didn't wear her pants to bed because she was afraid Naruto would reprimand her for being too forward. She went into Naruto's room, where he was already asleep, blushing. She carefully avoided disturbing Naruto or even touching him as she crawled in beside him. Naruto turned and embraced Hinata as she was falling asleep, murmuring, looks delicious. He was obviously still asleep when he abruptly licked her cheek. When Hinata realized what had happened, she immediately passed out for the third time that evening, smiling this time. At the time of her awakening, the sun had just begun to rise. For a while, she lay in bed and allowed her memories from yesterday to resurface. Being in someone else's bed and in someone else's house were 3 good reasons she wasn't freaking out at the moment. First of all, she was completely dressed. Second, Naruto's bed was covered in his faint scent. Third, this was not the first time she had seen Naruto's room interior. She wasn't a fangirl, and she hadn't sneaked in. Rather, she had occasionally spied on Naruto at home using her Byakugan, even seeing him once. She shook the ideas out of her mind. Around her, she could sense how her body was responding to that picture and his scent. She stretched, yawning, and sat up. She thought Naruto had gone to speak with her parents before they became concerned because he was not present. She rose and walked blearily from his bedroom to the restroom. She went to the toilet, sat down, and opened the door to the steam-filled room. A white noise that had been present when she woke up vanished as she finished and was ready to get up. She glanced up at the curtain and saw Naruto drawing it back just in time. Hinata was in bed with Naruto when he woke up early. He had begun to panic, but he eventually calmed down after recalling what had transpired the previous evening. Careful not to wake her, he had gotten out of bed and gone to the bathroom to begin his morning ritual. He was now looking for his towel as he left the shower. He froze when he noticed Hinata sitting on the toilet with her lower half uncovered. Several things occurred. Out of instinct, Hinata let out a scream and covered herself with her hands. Naruto stumbled backwards and slipped as blood spurted from his nose. He clung to the curtain, which ripped the rings off and landed on top of him, barely concealing him. When Hinata saw this, she turned to face him and saw that he was unconscious, with blood still dripping from his nose and his leg twitching. Naruto-kun? She asked. A few minutes later, Hinata was eating cereal while blushing profusely, and Naruto was sitting awkwardly at his table with tissues up his nose. Naruto began to lean his chair back a little and said, Hinata. Chan, don't you think that your parents will be worried that you never came home last night? Hinata leapt to her feet and exclaimed, "Oh Kami, he's probably sent out the rest of the clan searching for me." Naruto was startled and fell backward, hitting his head on the ground. "Oh, and Naruto-kun. Are you alright?" she asked, looking at him with concern as she saw that he was unconscious once more. They began walking to the Hyuga compound after finishing their breakfast. Hinata was twitching and flushed as she looked at Naruto. Hinata looked to her feet until he looked away, but Naruto, who now had a patch bandage on his head where he had struck it, had a pained expression on his face and occasionally glared at her. They went on in silence, with Naruto pondering the extent of his concussion and Hinata wondering if her father would comprehend her absence from home. They had nearly reached the compound when four ninja, each with the Hyuga's characteristic white eyes, suddenly appeared in front of them. The lead Hyuga looked at Naruto and asked, "Hinata Sama, where have you been? Has this boy harmed you in any way?" With the words, Y.US.C. Hinata was unsure of where to start. When Naruto noticed Hinata's nervousness, he moved between her and the others and said, "Hinata Chan has been with me. She had been attacked by some muggers." He glared unflinchingly at each of them until they turned away from those hard eyes, those eyes that had seen so much suffering, daring them to question his intentions. "Thank goodness I was passing by, and stopped them before they could hurt her. She passed out from the shock of the event, so I brought her back to my place until she woke up." "Is this true, Lady Hinata?" the lead Hyuga asked, glancing past Naruto to Hinata. "Why didn't you take her to the hospital or the Hyuga compound?" he asked after she nodded, turning back to Naruto and averting his eyes when he attempted to look him in the eye. He sighed and rubbed the back of his head, saying, "I didn't take her to the hospital because, as I said earlier, she wasn't hurt, she had only passed out. I didn't take her to her home because I have absolutely no idea where it is." Another of the four, believing he had him, said, "But, you could have asked somebody where it was, why didn't you do that?" He looked to the younger Hyuga, who, although already a Chunin, hid from his view behind the leader. "You and I both know that as soon as they saw me holding Hinata, they probably would have formed a mob and attacked me, thinking that I had been the one to attack her." He tried to grab Hinata, but was stopped when a hand with a few claws suddenly grabbed his arm. "Nonetheless, we need to take Hinata back to the Hyuga compound to talk with Hiyashi. Sama, you should come too, so you can explain your side of the story to him." He turned to face the one who had obstructed him and activated his Byakugan, saying, "Let go of me, Inuzuka brat." Startled, Naruto and Hinata turned to see an enraged Kiba clutching the Hyuga's arm, his face beginning to take on a feral appearance, and Akamaru yelling at them from atop his head. His jutsu. Enhanced fangs grew as he growled, "Leave her alone, Dakin." While sketching a ninja.to, he exclaimed, "I said let go, unless you want to lose that hand." Just then, Shino and Kurenai fell from a nearby roof. The red eyes of Kurenai seemed to glow as she glared at him, saying, "Kiba, that's enough. Let go of him, now." It was only when he heard Akamaru whimper that Kiba, still unyielding, stopped. He released the Jonin's arm reluctantly, leaving some claw marks where he had gripped it tightly. Kurenai turned to face the lead Hyuga and bowed slightly, saying, "I'm sorry, Hyuga-san, it won't happen again." Hyuga simply nodded, turned off his Byakugan, rubbed his wrist, and muttered something about Inuzuka mutts. "So Team 8 was searching for Hinata as well when you guys heard she was missing?" Naruto asked after a brief conversation, and they all nodded. "And when you were searching, Kiba suddenly ran off, because he had caught her scent." Shino rambled, "That is a good summary." As he continued to walk with his hands in his pockets, Naruto said, "I'm just surprised that you didn't find her scent at the alley and tracked it back to my place. We were planning on checking the path between the Hyuga compound and our training grounds, but Kiba got too excited when he heard that she was missing and we just ran after him, unable to calm him down." Kurenai said, "If we had gone there in the first place, instead of following any faint trace of her scent, which is no doubt covering the village, we wouldn't have been searching all night." She turned to Kiba and caused him to raise his head in disbelief. Hiyashi was waiting for news outside the compound when they arrived. His face briefly lit up with relief upon seeing Hinata, but he quickly checked himself and put on his tough exterior again. "Hinata, I trust you aren't hurt." Hinata exclaimed, "No father, I'm fine." Then she rushed to embrace him and started crying. Hiyashi raised an eyebrow at the others. He kept staring at Naruto, who was the only one without his bewildered expression and instead had a dejected expression. He gestured for them all to enter while he picked up Hinata as he had when she was smaller, her head resting on his shoulder and her nearly resting on his arm. He knew that Hanabi would be waiting for news with their mother, Hisakata, so they went to her room first. Hanabi jumped up and rushed to Hinata, who had already been put down, as soon as they were inside. Hiyashi shut the door behind him and led them into his office. He dismissed the other Hyuga as soon as they were all at ease. When he was certain that no one else was listening, he said, Naruto-san, you seem to be the one who knows what has happened, explain. They all sat there for a while after giving a brief rundown of what had happened before this, omitting Hinata's confession, their sharing of a bed, and the shower incident. When Hiyashi raised an eyebrow and said, where are these criminals now? I do hope you didn't just let them free to continue to prey on innocents. They were all startled out of their reverie. Kiba snarled, seemingly prepared to storm out of the room in search of them. Yeah, Naruto. I want to give these guys a piece of my mind. Naruto gestured for them to relax and said, don't worry, I had some shadow clones drop them off at the Anbu HQ. They should be in holding cells right now. He hurried away without allowing anyone to reply after saying, I'm sorry, but I think it's about time for me to go. My team is probably wondering where I am. They all departed after that. With the exception of the moment Naruto licked her, Hinata had told her mother and sister the same thing across the main branch house. He arrived at the assignment hall after noon. He got there just as the rest of his team was heading out. Hey guys, sorry about not showing up this morning. Sakura swore and glared at Naruto, saying, shut it Baka, we had to do the mission without you, so don't expect to get paid. He began, fine, like I care about that pocket change. I was late because, but was cut off once more. She waved him away and said, we don't care about how you found this new great ramen, Naruto. She was shocked by the gravity in his voice as he said, no, that's not why. He went on after noticing that they were paying attention. Again omitting the more embarrassing details, he told them the same version of the story he had told the others. I'm telling you this, because I wanted you guys try not bringing anything up that could make her upset. Her emotional state is very fragile right now. After finishing, Kakashi said, I'm proud of you Naruto, you did good. Alright then, seeing as how everything turned out okay in the end, let's get to some training, shall we? And headed for the training grounds. Naruto ran to catch up and said, what is it, Kakashi? Sensei, is it a new jutsu? Come on tell us. Just wait, I'll tell you when we arrive. They arrived a few minutes later, and Naruto was bouncing up and down with excitement, showing no signs of his previous serious demeanor. Okay, we're here, now tell us what this awesome new jutsu is. I'm going to teach you about Fuinjutsu, Naruto said, ceasing to jump but failing to stop shaking. Alright, I'll tell you, just settle down. Naruto said, what's that, never heard of it. Sasuke smirked as he remarked, Fuinjutsu is the art of seals, dobi. He held out an example explosive tag, some paper and ink, and a brush, saying, that's right Sasuke. Here, I want you all to try and copy the symbols on the explosive tags onto these other sheets of paper. Naruto looked at his supplies as though he had just been given a raw carrot and remarked, what, are we artists now? That sounds boring. Knowing how much he hated the cat, Kakashi said, well, if you don't want to do this, I heard that Tora got loose again, you could go after her, by yourself. No, I'm fine, I think I'll just find some place where I can draw in peace. Naruto began to perspire. He retreated, turned around, and hurried to the nearby stream. Just as he was about to begin, he became aware that he had nothing to write on. Hey, Kakashi. Sensei, how are we supposed to draw without a table to use? Ninja must adapt to their situation. You may run out of tags in the field and have to make more, he said with a grin. Be creative, I'm sure you can figure something out. It turned out that a few minutes later, Sakura had suddenly pulled out a clipboard, Sasuke had put on his headband, and Naruto was sitting at a desk and chair constructed from two clones wearing a henge. Sakura and Sasuke both submitted their initial attempts a few minutes later. He sighed as he turned to see Naruto still working on his. Sasuke, yours is nowhere close, but that's expected of a first attempt. Sakura, as expected, yours is close, but it's not quite right. Naruto shouted, done, and got up halfway through their second tries. He turned over the entire pile of papers that had been handed to him. Hey Naruto, you weren't supposed to do all of them at once, you were supposed to practice with them over time. Sakura exhaled. Expecting them to be mostly mindless doodles, Kakashi was shocked and said, how did you even do this? I've never seen anything like this before. He gestured for the other two to approach, his eyes wide. They were as shocked as Kakashi when they got there. Every single one is dead on, I see absolutely no mistakes. Sakura refused to accept that Naruto was superior to her and said, he must have cheated, He probably made a bunch of clones henge into the sheets of paper. Sasuke didn't want to believe it either. There are over 100 tags there, the Dobi isn't able to make that many clones. He probably just put all of the papers under a henge. Oh, he can make more than that many clones and barely break a sweat. The question isn't whether he could or not, but rather, whether he did. Kakashi said, looking at Naruto with a questioning expression. Well, knowing how much chakra Naruto possessed. He took one from Sasuke's stack and, with the others following, walked back to his desk. Oh, so you don't believe me? Give me some more paper and I'll show you. They were astounded to see him flawlessly replicate the seal onto the piece of paper in a matter of seconds. With a smile on his face, he approached a tree and leaned back against it, saying, There, ya see, all real. So, what's next? I don't even know, I only planned on teaching you how to draw them today, and arm them tomorrow. That's pretty much as far as my knowledge goes concerning Fuinjutsu. I suppose I could teach you how to arm them. Kakashi was speechless. He jumped up and down as he had in the past and said, Yeah, how do you do that, tell me. Disappointed, they returned to their writing supplies. Sakura, Sasuke, go back to drawing, I don't want you figuring out how, and then trying to use a malfunctioning tag and blow yourself up. Okay Naruto, how you do it, as you put a small amount of chakra into the paper, concentrating on the ink. Naruto snatched up a tag and infused it with chakra. He felt a little weaker after that, but assumed it was normal and turned to look at Kakashi inquisitively. He indicated a tree on the opposite side of the stream, roughly 2 meters from the shore, and said, Okay, just attach it to your kunai, and throw it, make it explode when it hits that tree over there. That is exactly what Naruto did, but when he attempted to make it explode, the explosion was so large that it left a crater and instantly turned the water that had been flowing by on the stream's edge to vapor. Water swiftly filled the crater, creating a small pond beside the stream. What in Kami's name had just happened? The other members of the team just stared at him. Naruto stood there massaging the back of his head and said, Hey, guess I put a little too much chakra into it, hee. Abruptly, a smoking, blackened branch dropped from the sky and struck Kakashi in the head. When Kakashi fell and was knocked unconscious, he asked, Kakashi, Sensei, are you alright? They all agreed that the day's training was over without exchanging words. Kakashi was taken to the hospital by Naruto's clone. Naruto went to the southeast as the others left. He jumped on top of a nearby apartment building and sat there looking at the Hokage monument, waiting for the light beam to appear. Hey, hopefully I won't have any more distractions, he said. As it turned out, he arrived at his destination without any problems. However, he didn't have to wait long. In just a few minutes, he caught sight of it and traced its trajectory, noticing that it was descending to the ground and passing behind some buildings that obscured his view. But before he could get a better look, it vanished, and he decided to go back tomorrow. Fortunately, he was not given the opportunity. It turned out that Kakashi's head injury was more severe than they had initially believed. Team 7 had to perform missions all day while he was in the hospital. It took them a long time after sunset to finish. She glared at Naruto, who didn't appear to be at all tired, and said, This is your fault Naruto. Why did you have to give Kakashi Sensei a concussion? She tried to sound sultry as she said, Man, I could really use a dip in the hot springs. My muscles hurt and I'm sweating a lot. Would you like to join me, Sasuke-kun? It's mixed bathing day. Sasuke turned off down an alley and hurried away, occasionally looking over his shoulder with a peculiar expression on his face. No thanks, I think I'm gonna go, dust my room. Naruto was laughing off to the side while Sakura hung her head and muttered, He'd rather clean his house than bathe with me. Sakura. Chan muttered to herself, I'll take you up on that offer Sakura. Chan. Sakura. Chan, without even listening to him. The following day Kakashi was released. Given that yesterday had fulfilled their weekly mission quota, they had arrived at the training grounds early. They saw what appeared to be a very pale bald man standing up and examining the memorial stone when they got to the training grounds. However, upon closer inspection, they discovered that the bandages were covering the person's head rather than their skin. Sir, we have training here, we need you to leave, said Sakura first. When he turned around, they all tried not to laugh, but Kakashi's head was nearly entirely covered in bandages, with only his right eye visible. It's not funny, they said. He hung his head sullenly and said, I think the nurses just used putting the bandages on my face as an excuse to take off my mask. Naruto couldn't contain his laughter when he had an idea. He tried not to laugh as he said, Hey, Kakashi. Sensei, I think I may know something that will cheer you up. What would that be, then? Kakashi looked up at him and asked. All right, here it is. Jutsu no Oiroke. They all saw a young, nude woman after a large puff of smoke swiftly cleared. Her honey voiced words, "Hey there sensei, why don't you teach me some new tricks?" She bent down and ran her hand up and down Kakashi's arm before a red splotch appeared on the bandages covering his face and quickly grew. He fell backwards, unconscious, but at the same moment, something they hadn't anticipated happened. Sasuke shot off into the air, propelled by the force of his nosebleed, landing a few feet away, knocked out and twitching. Naruto rolled on the ground, laughing, and changed back. "Oh, I thought Sensei would do it, but Sasuke as well? He's a pervert in disguise." Naruto. "Baka, I will murder you," Sakura shouted as she ran in his direction. "I'm going to have to be caught first." He laughed all the way as he started to run. After a half hour, Sakura was sitting a few feet away, practicing her seals, occasionally glancing over at the 3 male members of Team 7 who were leaning against the wooden posts, all of whom were recuperating from nosebleeds, though Naruto's was for a different reason than the others. "Hey, Kakashi. Sensei." Naruto had leaned over when Sakura wasn't looking. "Watch this. Otakanoko Kaisaku. Oiroke no Jutsu." When the smoke cleared, Sakura stood up, sighing, and cracked her knuckles in preparation for beating him down. "Hey Sakura. Chan, how about we go somewhere else together?" An older looking Sasuke, dressed only in shorts, was standing in the clearing smoke, running his hands through his hair. Sakura pulled a Hinata, and her face turned redder than a tomato, with blood trickling from her nose, before she passed out smiling. Kakashi had started laughing right away, while Sasuke sat there gaping, his eyes twitching. Trying not to laugh, Kakashi remarked, "If you had really wanted to cheer me up, Naruto, you should have done that from the start." Naruto returned with a smile. After Sakura woke up, Naruto's face was covered in bruises, and they were all sitting there staring at one another in another half hour. "All right, we never talk about this, okay?" Sakura said as she examined each of them. They all hung their heads in unison as they said, "Agreed." After training that night, Naruto had returned to find the light's location, arriving just in time to discover that it was pointing somewhere along the wall. After searching the wall from top to bottom and failing to find anything out of the ordinary, he made the decision to try again the following day. After Sakura and Sasuke had begun practicing their seal making techniques tomorrow afternoon, Kakashi drew Naruto aside and said, "Listen, Naruto, you have more natural talent with seals than I've ever seen. For this reason, I believe you ought to visit the library and obtain some books and scrolls about sealing. Only a handful of Fuinjutsu experts remain in Konoha, and they are all currently very busy. However, I'll do my best to respond to any questions you may have." "The library?" Naruto leaned down and muttered, "The librarian lady scares me." Kakashi saw him gesture to approach, so he did. I've never been in there before." After receiving strange looks from Sakura and Sasuke, as well as a glare from Naruto, Kakashi brought his head back, his eyes wide, and he started laughing uncontrollably. I'm okay," he said. "I had to express that. I'll pick up some items for you at the library." He was jumping up and down now, believing that he would have a unique skill in the village, similar to what Sasuke would eventually have once he learned to use the Sharingan. "Thank you, Kakashi. Sensei, I'll make sure to learn all I can, I promise." He smiled beneath his mask and said, "Okay, calm down. It's like trying to teach a hyperactive monkey. I'll go get them, and I want you to practice arming the tags," he said. He leapt away and said, "Be back in a few." When he returned an hour or so later, he discovered a pile of at least 6 tree trunks across the stream, with some clones dragging another onto it. "What's going on?" He was perplexed as he stood there until the real Naruto approached him and grabbed the books. Naruto made more clones and said, "Since you're back, I'm gonna have my clones take them to the lumber mill on the other side of town." He said, "I was knocking down so many trees that it seemed like a waste to just leave them there." Naruto left right away for home, hoping his clones wouldn't mess things up. Apparently too much to hope for. After a few minutes, a group of Narutos began to move through the streets of Konoha, each carrying a fallen log, and they were all gawked at in bewilderment before becoming lost. Some of the clones that were meant to clear a path began to fight, saying, "I thought you knew how to get there." "Stupid, we both know the same things, so why would I know if you didn't? You just called yourself a fool, huh? Why you—" In the middle of the road, they got into a fight. The worst part was that they were at the top of a hill and it began rolling down, gaining momentum. Most people had been paying attention and had moved out of the way before there was any danger, but one person at the bottom of the hill was unaware, apparently staring at a food poster, so the Narutos that had been fighting stopped and started running to catch it when they noticed that one of them was not paying attention. Unknowingly, one of the Narutos carrying a log let go to try to break it up, but this caused the other Narutos to drop the log from the sudden imbalance. I'm pleasantly plump, not fat. An angry Choji had turned around and grabbed the log just as it was about to hit him. With superhuman strength, he picked it up and threw it at the group of Narutos, most of whom dispelled. "Oh, hey Naruto." When he saw the group of clones, the Akamichi said, "I didn't see you there." The real Naruto, who was back at his apartment, cringed and sighed as the memories of the clones returned to him, and he created a few more clones to replace the ones that were dispelled. When the time came, he was ready because he had prepared a number of clones to stand along the wall until the beam appeared, and when it did, Naruto ran over to see that there were some thick, dark red lines on the wall that appeared to form some kind of seal that he was unaware of. He spent a few hours reading the various books that he was given, the majority of which simply explained the various uses of seals, before returning to the edge of town to search along the wall. What kind of seal is that? It's so complex. Naruto simply stood there, staring at it. It was barely noticeable against the red wall, only slightly darker, so walking past it wouldn't be difficult. He was startled out of his reverie when the light beam began to fade, so he had a shadow clone hinge into a piece of paper and another into a pencil, and he placed them against the wall and traced the image with blinding speed, tracing what would have taken most people over 10 minutes in just 3 seconds. What could this seal be for? It's completely different from any of the other seals I've seen. When he realized that what he was holding wasn't a permanent copy, he pulled out a real piece of paper, a brush, and some ink and began copying it down, this time slowly, making sure he didn't leave anything out. After he finished, he dispelled the clones, and he shuddered as he realized what it felt like to be written on, and be written with. He had marked the spot on the wall with a kunai. He had marked it with a kunai lodged in the ground, locked the door behind him, and proceeded home. He had just opened a new scroll when his eyes began to sag. He had finished pulling out the seal related material and began comparing pictures to what he had just copied down. After several more hours, he still hadn't found a match. A few hours later, he heard a fist rapping on his door, waking him up. "Open up, Naruto." "Baka." The voice made Naruto's head snap up, and he yawned as he shuffled to the door. "At this early hour of the morning, what do you want?" Rubbing the sleep from his eyes, Naruto remarked, "I was asleep." "Naruto, it's almost noon. It's not early. You missed the mission because you were late." Seeing the bags under his eyes, she stood with her hands on her hips and said, "How long were you up last night?" He hardly suppressed a yawn as he said, "Oh, I don't know, a few hours. I was going over the stuff that Kakashi gave me." She waited for Naruto to pass her, pinching her nose as he did so. "Whatever, we need you at the training grounds." "Ew, Naruto, you stink. When was the last time you took a shower?" "A few days ago," Naruto said, scrunching up his face and sniffing his arm. "I can't find a store that has a shower curtain that will let me in because mine broke. The floor there was already terrible, and I didn't want to make it worse." She retreated from him in an attempt to avoid the stench. "Whatever, you can wash yourself in the stream when we get there. Just go get a change of clothes and some soap, I'll go ahead." With everyone else keeping their distance, he arrived at the training grounds a few minutes later. "So, Kakashi Sensei, what are you going to teach us today?" Still attempting to awaken, Naruto uttered those words. "Oh, not much. Just some training in taijutsu." Sakura had told him that he smelled bad, but he was only now noticing it. "Maybe you should go get washed first. We'll start without you," he said, scrunching up his nose. "You and Sakura are lacking in that department." In response, he grunted and moved toward the stream, beginning to undress. "Not here, Baka." Sakura threw a pebble and struck Naruto in the head, shouting, "Go downstream, we don't want to watch you bathe." When he returned from his bath, he saw that Sakura and Sasuke were both using only taijutsu to attack Kakashi without landing a single blow, and that Kakashi had his book out, seemingly not taking his eyes off it, even though he was dodging and blocking every attack. Naruto saw this and jumped into the fray, charging Kakashi from behind shortly after he had blocked one of Sasuke's attacks. He was about to hit him when Kakashi threw his book into the air, dodging to the side and grabbing Naruto's arm. They landed in a heap. "I didn't say you could join yet, Naruto," Kakashi said, gathering himself before catching his falling book and going back to reading. The following days proceeded as follows. Missions in the morning, training in the afternoon, and sporadic switching to something new to see if any of them were skilled in anything. Kakashi discovered that Sakura was good at chakra control but not very good at taijutsu. Sasuke was good at taijutsu but mediocre in other areas, and Naruto was not very good at any of them. His only skill that he was decent at, aside from fuinjutsu, was taijutsu, and he was somewhere in the middle of the other two. He chose to give them a day off at the end of the week. Naruto had been waiting for only a day because he had been so busy that he hadn't had time to check on Hinata. After training and missions, he would always spend an hour or so going through the seals before bed, not trying to learn them but simply trying to match any of the designs to the one he had found. After changing, he went to the Hyuga estate and knocked on the door, having to wait for about 2 minutes before someone answered. "Oh, hey, I'd like to talk to Hinata. Chan, is she here?" He attempted to look past him and into the house, but the individual purposefully obscured his view. Pale eyes were staring at him when he looked up. "Sorry, but you can't talk to her right now," he said bluntly, hoping that would end the argument. It obviously didn't. "Why not? Is she injured?" he inquired, attempting to glance around him once more but being blocked. "I don't need to inform you of that." He was about to activate his Byakugan when he felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Hiyashi glaring at him. "Now leave before I have to remove you by force, brat." "Pardon me, Hiyashi Sama, but I was just about to remove this pest from the grounds." "Now, why would you attempt to get him to go?" Hiyashi tightened his hold on his shoulder and remarked, "He is always welcome here for how he has helped Hinata." The servant began to say, "But, Hiyashi Sama, he is the..." but stopped when Hiyashi used his Byakugan. "Yes, Hiyashi Sama, as you wish." He stepped aside to allow Naruto to enter and bowed. Ignoring the glare he was getting from behind him, Naruto entered and said, "Hiyashi Sama, is Hinata Chan okay?" Naruto turned back to Hiyashi and said, "I haven't seen her all week. She hasn't left the estate since returning, but she is doing fine." Hiyashi tried to reassure him by saying, "She's shaken up, but she's still training and getting visits from her team." "Oh, that's good. I simply wanted to see how she was doing." Naruto began to turn, but Hiyashi pulled him back. "I'll be leaving now. I understand how lonely your apartment is, so don't be silly. Why don't you join us for dinner? We were just getting started. Everyone, we have an unexpected guest." He gestured to a vacant seat next to Hinata and had Naruto sit down. "Everyone, we have an unexpected guest," he said, not waiting for a response. He nearly pulled Naruto into the dining room, which was easily twice as large as Naruto's entire apartment. Hiyashi sat at the end of the table, while Hanabi sat across from Naruto, with Hisakata on her left. When Hiyashi clapped his hands, a dozen servants emerged with platters of food, placed them on the table in front of the seated people, and then left and returned with dishes and chopsticks, which were given to each person separately. Following a brief prayer, everyone, aside from Naruto, got food from the various platters and began to eat. Hiyashi saw this and said, "Naruto, why aren't you eating? Is something the matter?" Hiyashi asked, and since Naruto didn't appear to hear, he approached him and put his hand on his shoulder. No, it's just that I was hoping to, well, watch the sunset." Naruto, who had been lost in thought, jumped when he felt the hand on his shoulder and looked up into Hiyashi's eyes, concluding that his statement was only partially accurate. "I apologize for that, but wouldn't it be possible for you to watch it tomorrow?" With a slight smile, he walked back to his seat and sat down, saying, "Now on the other hand, it's not every day that someone outside the clan has the chance to eat dinner with the Hyuga, so eat up." Naruto shrugged and picked up some food, keeping it onto his plate. Naruto was stuffed after 3 plates, and he noticed that Hinata hadn't even finished half of her first plate. "Are you certain you're okay, Hinata Chan?" He gave her a worried look as he said, "You've hardly eaten anything." He said, "Well, I heard from the other girls that they were going on a diet, so I decided to as well," and she blushed and turned away, twitching her index fingers once more as she jumped and dropped her chopsticks. She looked over at him, blushing even more, and said, "We're doing it for Sasuke, but well, Hinata Chan, not all guys like girls to be all skin and bones," Naruto said, nodding in comprehension as he recalled her confession. "You need to eat right if you want to become a strong kunoichi," he said, picking up her plate and replacing the food that had already been consumed. "Besides, it's just not healthy. Do you not want to be strong?" As he handed her the plate back, he smiled and winked at her, making sure their hands touched just enough. Hinata's eyes widened at the sight of his wink, and she began to eat quickly, only pausing to catch her breath. "Whoa, slow down there, you'll choke," Naruto said, trying not to laugh, but the others didn't even try. They just started laughing, and when Hinata saw it, she blushed and slowed down. Following their meal, they sat and chatted for a while when Naruto had an idea. "Hiyashi Sama, I have a question." Naruto waited for the conversation to end and then pulled out his copy of the seal after observing Hiyashi's gesture for him to continue. "I'm not sure how much you know about seals, but have you ever seen this kind of seal before?" He gave the paper to Hiyashi, who looked it over. It's not familiar, but I'm not really the one to ask, Hiyashi said, shaking his head and handing it back to him. Hiyashi abruptly got up and said, I think it is about time for us to go to bed, but sadly, nobody in the village has seen Jiraiya Sensei for a few years. If he were here, he probably could figure it out. Holding Hanabi and Hisakata's hands, he said, Hinata, show our guest out. Naruto immediately made the decision to test his skills by finding the Yondaime's vault on his own and keeping whatever was inside as his own. As they made their way through the estate to the door, Hinata was just blushing and Naruto had his hands behind his head. Hinata-chan, why do you wear your hair short? With his hands in his pockets, Naruto gazed at her and asked, never pausing his gait. But Hinata paused and lowered her gaze, saying, well, Naruto-kun, it's because Sasuke likes long hair, and all the other girls wear it long. She muttered, I didn't want page people to think that I liked him, and kept walking, catching up to Naruto, who had paused to wait for her. With his trademark smile, Naruto snickered and said, oh, that. I was the one that started that rumor, he said. One day, Sasuke muttered that he detested long hair because it was always in the way. Hinata blushed even more because she said, I like long hair, and thought it'd be nice if all of the girls, especially you Hinata, had long hair. They arrived at the door and said, well, good night Hinata-chan. Before Hinata could reply, Naruto ran out the door. Hinata wanted to say one more thing and was going to call him, but she decided to wait, thinking, I can wait a little while. At least he's acknowledging me, and that's enough for now. She turned and grinned as she walked back to her room. They went to the training grounds after Kakashi failed to appear at the mission hall the following day. By the time he reached the training grounds, it was nearly noon. He discovered them all engaged in a sparring match, with Sasuke winning and Sakura and Naruto competing. Kakashi. Sensei, I know that you're late sometimes, and that you're trying to fix it, but this is ridiculous. Sakura, as usual, was the first to speak up when they stopped when they saw him. She glared at him, wondering if he would let her get away with hitting him. She observed that his flak jacket was slightly crooked and that his hair was sticking out in a few spots. Also, you look horrible, it looks like you just woke up. He approached them while adjusting his jacket and said, that's because I did. I had a rough night, but don't ask me why. Trust me, you don't want to know. They shrugged and resumed their training, this time against Kakashi as a trio. They became aware that something had changed after a short time. After recuperating from a counterattack, Naruto said, Nay, Kakashi. Sensei, why aren't you reading your orange book? I'm not sure, I just don't feel like it. Kakashi looked at him in shock and said, besides, I think I left it back at my place. He searched his pockets and pouches but couldn't find it. He hoped they wouldn't question his slip. Sakura wasn't buying it. She wanted to follow him and find out where he had been the night before, so she said, are you alright? You never go anywhere without that book. Maybe we should stop so you can go get it. Seeing right through her plan, he looked at her and said, no thanks, I think that we'll just keep training. When they approached the wooden pillars, Kakashi said, I'm going to teach you guys a new technique. In the hopes that his kunai hadn't been tampered with, Naruto painfully raced towards the seal's location, his muscles aching from training. He needed to confirm something, so he needed to see it again. As the sun was sinking, he sped across the rooftops to the wall and located his kunai marker. Examining the elaborate design, he contrasted it with the copy he was carrying. He was shocked to hear, there are no differences, I copied it down perfectly. He had assumed that he had done it incorrectly. He raised his hand and ran his fingers along the lines. Unexpectedly, his hand became stuck as soon as it was fully over the seal, and he could feel his chakra beginning to deplete. He made a valiant attempt to remove his hand, but it was unsuccessful. The seal was beginning to glow blue, but the sun had already set. The ink on paper bombs glows when I arm them, so if I do the same here, he thought, and began pumping more of his chakra into the seal. His chakra was quickly running low, and the seal only became brighter. I can't stop the flow, damn it, I'll die at this rate. His vision darkened, and he collapsed into the shadows. He lay there for several minutes before realizing that he wasn't unconscious. Seeing that his hand was free too, he began to stand up. Glancing around, he realized he was at the entrance to a pitch black tunnel that slopped steadily downward. He took a few steps back and noticed a door on the wall's side had opened. What on earth is happening? Was there a lock of some sort? Naruto sat down on the ground and held his head as he felt extremely dizzy. For a few minutes, he sat there trying to catch his breath and process what had just transpired. He stood up, threw a pebble into the tunnel, and heard it strike a wall right away. With the hope that no one else would stop by and try to explore before him, He made the decision to return tomorrow after noticing the waning light. The doorway was closing as he was leaving, and he turned to see the wall growing back to fill the hole after hearing a surprisingly quiet rumbling. He returned to the wall and felt around, but he could find no evidence of a door having been there, such as cracks. "I hope I don't have to use as much chakra as I did last time to reopen it," he sighed, putting his hands in his pockets before turning around and making his way home in the last of the light. He rushed back to the tunnel after a largely uneventful training day, this time carrying a flashlight and a couple glow sticks. He sat facing the wall and gazed at the area above his kunai. Expecting the worst, he put his hand on the seal as soon as he saw the markings. He wasn't prepared for it to open up almost instantly, with his chakra hardly changing. For several minutes, he gazed into the night, startled by the sound of a cat meowing behind him. A familiar brown cat with a red bow on her ear vanished into an alley as he turned around. He laughed to himself, then remembered that another genin team would be arriving shortly if she was close. He switched on his flashlight and rushed into the tunnel. He heard the door close after a few steps and turned to face it. He made the decision to continue, worrying about how he would escape later. He kept walking, but he didn't get very far before coming to a stop. Is this it? A small tunnel into the wall that has nothing in it? Is this the secret vault of the Yondaime? He screamed, angry. He began to move forward, looking to see if the end of the wall had another seal. He heard a strange noise coming from beneath his feet just as he was about to arrive. Sweat dropped from his eyes as he saw a manhole cover. With the flashlight in his mouth, he flipped the cover over to reveal a tiny opening with a ladder that descended into the shadows. Taking one of the glow sticks he had packed, he turned it on and lowered it into the hole. About 3 seconds after it was dropped, the faint sound of it hitting the ground was heard before it swiftly vanished into the darkness. About 60 meters. He began descending the ladder while holding the flashlight in his mouth, lowering himself when he came to another tunnel. Placing the glow stick in his pocket, he picked it up. When he noticed the flashlight's light bouncing off of something a few inches away from his nose, he halted his progress. The light in front of him shone as he fell backwards in shock. When he saw what he had nearly walked into, he started to perspire. A massive crisscrossing of ninja wire with explosive tags on it stood in front of him. It continued for several meters before coming to a halt at a tiny metal door. Knowing that he would have died at this moment if he had taken one more step, he let out a sigh of relief. He stood up and surveyed his surroundings. This section of the tunnel measured roughly 3 meters in height and 2 meters in width. He noticed that the wire was creating an impenetrable wall with no gaps big enough to accommodate a kunai. He used his flashlight to scan the walls and noticed that there was a tiny seal at each location where the wire was fastened to the wall. On the wall beside him and the door were 2 more seals. The seal he had discovered outside didn't resemble it at all. It was more of a swirl pattern and was black. He noticed that the ones next to him and the ones on the wall and door differed slightly when he looked closely. The kanji for locked was in the middle of the one next to him, while the kanji for closed was in the other parts. He pushed his chakra into the seal and put his hand in the middle to make sure it wouldn't work. He yelled and abruptly returned his hand. When chakra was applied to the seal, it turned red, scorching the areas of his hand that had come into contact with the ink. He removed all the materials needed to create a seal, which he now carried with him at all times just in case, after realizing that there was nothing he could do here without additional knowledge. He began copying down the seals he saw, taking his time and being careful not to make any mistakes. After a short while, he stood up, put the used paper back in his pouch, and began climbing back up to the surface. Upon arriving at the entrance, he shone the light on the wall and noticed a seal that was exactly the same as the one outside. Feeling relieved that no one was around, he pushed his chakra into it and left. His thoughts were too preoccupied to run, so he began to walk back to his apartment. Seeing no reason to hurry, he made the decision to complete the remaining riddle slowly. After returning to his apartment, he prepared for bed by taking a few minutes to sit down and examine the riddle while putting his new seals in his desk. When everything is painted red and your pals are considering going to bed, examine the soul on the head of the flash. Look into the Yondaime's eyes at sunset. He had already figured that out. When the light goes out, you have to share your power. Be mindful of the paper and ink. Otherwise, there won't be any more fights. Following the light beam and sharing my chakra, or what makes me powerful, with the seal made more sense now. After that, I should be on the lookout for paper bombs or risk dying. From the combination of red and yellow bleeding orange blood is necessary. Inside, you'll discover the instruments to replace us. He still didn't know a thing about the last part. He still had no idea what orange blood was or why it was mentioned that orange is derived from yellow and red. And who is the other individual in our group? Considering how much had changed over the previous month, he sighed, put it back in a drawer, and went to bed. Naruto was pleasantly surprised to learn that they had been assigned the task of finding Tora the following morning. He urged them to follow him as they ran out of the mission hall, saying, "Come on guys, hurry up. Let's finish this mission." Sakura turned to Kakashi for guidance and remarked, "What's got you so worked up, Naruto? I thought you hated catching Tora." After giving Kakashi the wireless radio and giving Naruto another, Sasuke nodded and said, "Yeah Dobi, don't get so worked up. We need to find where she is first." Naruto put on his radio and bounded off towards the edge of town, saying, "Whatever, you guys can do that, I'll be right back." Before they could react, he had already left. Sakura shouted, "Shaw, that baka is so going to get it when he gets back," but jumped when she heard Naruto in her ear. With the others unsure of his meaning, he said, "You don't have to yell Sakura-chan, I can hear you just fine. Besides, you'll be happy when I come back." After making an army of shadow clones, Naruto hurried to the alley where he had last seen her. He heard something moving inside a dumpster and circled it. Tora began attempting to rip the face of the clone holding her off when he caught her. Suddenly he thought of something. In order to ensure that he could hold Tora without her biting off his fingers, he had one of his clones henge into a cage. "Hey guys, I got Tora, meet me at the assignment hall." The rest of his team questioned him about how he had discovered her so quickly after they were reunited. Returning the reluctant cat to her owner, he simply gave the half-true response, "I used shadow clones to find her." They were instructed to wait for another mission because they had completed the first one so fast. "Let's see, what do we have? Ah, you could babysit the chief counselor's baby, or dig up potatoes at," Hiruzen said, pulling out the scroll listing the options for D-rank missions. He sat down on the ground and told the others, "Come on, isn't there anything more exciting that you could give us, Gigi? These missions are all too easy and boring." He made it clear that he wouldn't leave until he received something better. Then Hiruzen called out for their client to enter. "Alright, if that's how you're going to be, then I guess I have no choice. I'll assign you to an escort mission that we just received." Hiruzen sighed. An elderly man came in, leaning against the wall and obviously intoxicated, with some kind of alcohol in one hand. He stumbled over to Naruto and looked at him, slurring, "So I'm supposed to be escorted by these brats? Are you sure that they're really ninja? You look kind of funny, what happened to you?" When Kakashi grabbed the back of Naruto's jacket and said, "Naruto, you can't kill the client, or do you want to fail your first C-rank mission?" Naruto finally stopped struggling and was able to stop the old man from being torn to pieces. He muttered obscenities while crossing his arms. In order to pack, Naruto had rushed home. He was making sure he had everything in his pack as he made his way to the gates. Pork ramen, check. Special pork ramen, check. Pork and miso ramen, check. Beef. He muttered as he glanced through the various items on the list. Hello Naruto-kun. Hinata was standing there, staring at Naruto anxiously when he looked up. He put the pack back on his shoulders and said, "Hey Hinata-chan, what's up?" He was certain that he had everything, and the other members of his team would assist him if he didn't. She became anxious when she saw the pack he was carrying and asked, "Where are you going, Naruto?" "My team and I are going on a C-rank mission. We have it to escort a drunk asshole to his bridge so he can finish it." With a puzzled expression on her face, Hinata asked, "Why? You're leaving the Versus village? For how long?" "Not that long. A week at most. Hopefully some bandits will be stupid enough to attack us. I want to see some action. Not they'd be much of a. Pages please be circa careful, IID. Don't know how I circa could go on if you died." Hinata sobbed as she abruptly embraced him. He tried to reassure her by saying, "Whoa, where did this come from? No need to cry Hinata, this is me we're talking about, I'll be fine. Hinata, listen to me." He pushed her back a little so he could look into her eyes and said, "It's just a C-rank mission, I'm not going to get hurt." After realizing it had no effect, he became serious. She sniffed. "Do you promise?" she said. "I can't promise that, things can happen. Whatever the case, you need to be tough. I know how much I mean to you, but whatever happens in life, you have to keep going, and don't let anyone tell you, including yourself, that you aren't a great ninja." She dried her tears and gave Naruto a more respectful look than ever before, if that was possible. She wiped the tears from her eyes and grinned, saying, "Alright Naruto-kun, I'll do my best." After giving her a smile in return, Naruto turned to face the sun and hurried to the front gates, waving at her. "Well Hinata-chan, I'd better get going. I don't want to be later than my sensei. Bye, and remember, be strong." Shortly afterward, they left the gates and made their way to the land of waves. Knowing that he needed to learn more about Fuinjutsu in order to enter the vault, Naruto had brought along a few of his scrolls on the subject. He discovered a type of seal that could be used to store multiple items inside of a single scroll after they had been walking for roughly 2 hours. With a large enough scroll and enough time, somebody could potentially store an entire house into one scroll. He began to think of all the possibilities. Kakashi gave his team a silent nod of approval. After an hour or so of travel, they had unintentionally fallen into what appeared to be a formation. Sakura was on the other side of the Uzumaki, Naruto was lagging slightly to the left, and Sasuke had taken the initiative. Kakashi hovered back, and Tazuna was roughly in the center of the rough triangle. Assuring the client that they were taking the task seriously, the Jonin could see that they were relieved. During their journey, Kakashi noticed a puddle that seemed completely out of place given that it was the dry season and it hadn't rained for weeks. Naturally, High no Kuni outsiders wouldn't consider this. Whatever. It was clear that jutsu was being used, and that an ambush had been set up for them. Ninja was what jutsu meant. A target was what ninja meant. His group would be alright. They were too well prepared to be anything but, of course, Kakashi himself would be alright. Ultimately, the log's strength was sufficient. However, the transformed log's power was ungodly. As the group passed, 2 forms emerged from the puddle, using stealth worthy of their Chunin rank, unaware of the Jonin's thoughts. The younger brother, Maizu, was crouching on top of the older brother, Gozu. For a brief moment, the demon brothers eyed their targets, their mouths nearly watering from the savage sneers concealed behind their breathing apparatuses. It's almost time. He was about to give it a try, drawing the seal on a wooden tile, when 2 ninja appeared out of a nearby puddle. Using a chain with blades attached to one's right gauntlet and the other's left, they flew in Kakashi's direction. Kakashi could only utter the words, "Shit," before the chain was fastened around him and severed, nipping him to pieces. The attackers were smiling slyly at Team 7 as they watched the bloody pieces of their sensei fall to the ground. Completely unprepared for an attack, Naruto was stunned. He saw Sasuke rush in before he could get over the shock of what had just transpired. Sasuke leapt over their chain and threw a kunai, trapping it on the ground. The chain of their gauntlets snapped off when he split. Kicked them both, sending them flying. However, they recovered swiftly, with one charging Tazuna and Sakura, who was protecting him, and the other charging the still stunned Naruto. Thinking fast enough, Naruto raised the wooden tile and used it to deflect the clawed gauntlet just enough to keep him safe. Just as Naruto was getting ready to launch a counterattack, he looked up. Was the battle over? Perhaps 4 seconds had passed, but it was already over. In front of him was Kakashi, holding the 2 missing nin, completely unharmed. "Nay, Kakashi. Sensei, what just happened?" he asked, completely bewildered, as he brought down the kunai he had escaped. With a disappointed expression on his face, he said, "I performed a substitution jutsu before they killed me, and decided to test you guys, see how you would react." He grinned at them in the hopes that they would be pleased with his quick thinking. "Well, couldn't you have given me a bit more time? I was just about to kick their asses." He turned to face Naruto and said, "No, I couldn't have. If I had given you any more time, Tazuna, Sakura, or Sasuke would have been seriously hurt." Naruto hung his head, primarily in contemplation but also with a hint of melancholy. Kakashi congratulated his other students on their performance in live combat, which they deserved. The demon brothers were then tied to a tree by Kakashi, who used extremely skillful knots. As the genin had observed, the pair was renowned for attacking relentlessly until their targets were eliminated, he remarked. They confessed without much prodding that they had been sent to kill the bridge builder when he briefly questioned their prisoners. Before rendering them unconscious once more, he politely thanked them for the information. With a serious expression on his face, Kakashi turned to face Tazuna. It turned out that the old man's income was insufficient to cover anything beyond the price of a C-rank mission. Nami no Kuni's economy was being pillaged by a Western billionaire named Gato, whose shipping company Kakashi was aware of. The Land of Waves was quickly reduced to a desolate and impoverished state as his company quickly monopolized control of the nation's import and export. One of the many ways Gato broke and controlled the country's citizens was by smuggling drugs and other types of contraband in. Wave's only chance of surviving this siege was Tazuna finishing the bridge. The economy would revive and the populace would be free to start trading what little they had left. Gato was aware of this and refused to risk losing total authority over a whole country. It would not be thorough enough for him to put a price on Tazuna's head. Rather, Gato had decided to personally employ shinobi to look after the bridge builder. Only Chunin were among the 2 who had recently attacked them. Kakashi told his team that an elite would be the next assassin. A Jonin. Lowly, Kakashi uttered the words, "This is well beyond the scope of our original mission. Our assignment was to protect you from thieves or gangs." No one in attendance was unaware of the significance of those words. Sasuke made a firm decision. No matter how risky the mission got, he would not abandon it. Itachi was far superior to anything that was thrown at them. Sakura remained silent and watched her teammates' reactions. When she saw Naruto's shoulders trembling a little, she was ready to comfort him before. Naruto laughed arrogantly, hands behind his head. "This is exciting. We get to kick a Jonin's ass and protect our client. There's no way we'll back away from this, Kakashi. Sensei. It's our duty as shinobi to continue with the mission, and adapt to circumstances. We won't crap out because it got a little difficult, right guys?" The query received two nods. One with a certain smile and the other with a self-assured smirk. They wouldn't let Team 7 down. "Well," Kakashi said quietly, tapping his Hite.8, "I guess we'll continue if you're that adamant about it. The Anbu patrol will apprehend these guys eventually. Naruto, you're on pickup duty since you weren't much help in the fight. Find the supplies of the enemy, they shouldn't be far." While the original went over to the chain that was still pinned to the ground, Naruto nodded and made a dozen shadow clones to search the area. "You know what, I'm talking this chain." Naruto yanked the kunai free and started coiling the chain, being cautious not to cut himself in case it was poisoned. Initially, he had only intended to get Sasuke's kunai. Later, he would examine it. Sasuke raised an eyebrow in observation. He challenged him, asking, "What makes you think you'll be able to use that thing in battle?" He paused his work and jerked his head in his direction. "Teme. No one asked you. Besides, I could probably use it with the help of some clones," he replied. The clones all returned with the bottle's loot just as he was wrapping the chain. From his pouch he took an emerald-colored scroll, which he rolled out onto the floor. There seemed to be no better time to give it a try than now. He swiftly applied a number of seals to the scroll, and then, with the help of some chakra, he was able to successfully store the items there, sorting them by type. Astonished that Naruto had come that far, Kakashi took note of this with one eye. Storage was said to be extremely challenging, particularly when packing several items into one seal. The five arrived at the seashore after several more hours of walking. A small boat anchored near the shore caught the group's attention. The man beside it, whom they assumed to be its owner, was visibly excitedly checking a pocket watch. Even a ninja prodigy could see that Tazuna had made arrangements for transportation. They had reached the land of waves following a brief boat ride. Naruto experienced a chill as soon as he stepped onto the beach. This place is special, he thought, sensing that the events that were about to transpire would influence the lives of many, including himself. The group started walking again. The trees were a little different from those in the shinobi's native land. Compared to the dry, deficient greenery of Hai no Kuni, they were able to grow more healthily due to the cool climate and humidity. However, they were an odd gray color. After only a few minutes of walking, Naruto abruptly threw a kunai into the bushes. "Haha, gotcha," he exclaimed as he swiftly followed his weapon's trail to check if he had struck anything. The others watched. As Naruto opened the bush to reveal a stunned rabbit, Kakashi, despite his rigorous training and self-control, could not help but groan. Naruto let out a groan of regret. He said, "Oh, I'm sorry little rabbit, I'm sorry." This was his umpteenth apology. Naruto appeared on the verge of tears. Tazuna held on to his pounding heart. "Is that boy attempting to break my heart? Before we get home, he'll kill me." A snow hare during this season. When winter ends, they shed that coat. This one must have been recently released from captivity. For Kawarami's sake. Kakashi's gaze moved around. "They're here already." Sakura rolled her eyes and sighed, "Really, Naruto?" They had just finished talking when Kakashi yelled, "Everyone, get down." They all immediately ducked to the ground, with the exception of Sakura and Tazuna, who were tackled to the ground by the former. The man on top of the hilt of the sword that had lodged itself nearly midway through a tree caught Kakashi's attention. Over his shoulder, the man's bandaged face gave them a menacing look. Sakura pondered whether Jonin had a strange fetish for wearing a tilted headband or covering their face. Kakashi assumed a ready stance, ready to reveal his Sharingan, and said, "Momochi Zabuza, the demon of the mist." The words, Sharingan no Kakashi, made Sasuke's eyes enlarge, and he immediately turned to face his sensei. He surveyed the other members of the team, unimpressed, and said, "I suppose I could forgive the demon brothers if it was you they had faced. Cute kids, Kakashi. But I'd suggest you keep them out of this." Kakashi gave the order, "You three protect Tazuna.san," while holding his Hite.8 in one hand and making a hand signal with the other. The sight of the Sharingan astounded Sasuke, who said, "Try to stay out of it, because this guy is on a whole other level than the other two." An obnoxious blonde interrupted him, saying, "Oi, Teme! Get over here, we need to guard Tazuna." Sasuke immediately leapt into position around Tazuna. Zabuza reiterated bluntly, "I'm here to kill the old man," which made Tazuna wince. "But it seems I'll have to beat you first, Kakashi." Zabuza snatched up the sword's handle and quickly kicked off the tree. With frightening speed for a man his size, he landed on the lake a fraction of a second later. Through unseen means, the Zanbato was holstered onto the rogue shinobi's back. His big hands were raised above his head and placed just below his face in a hand seal that no one else could see. Ninpo. Kirigakure no Jutsu. Kakashi observed that the low-level jutsu was using a lot of chakra. A dense layer of mist replaced the light fog that had been hovering over the area. The sight of the genin was no longer so much a strength as a weakness. Zabuza disappeared beneath the water's surface. Kakashi told them, "He'll come after me first," with a composed demeanor. Momochi Zabuza was known for his mastery of the silent killing technique. Before the enemy even notices it, they're dead. Be careful. The mist grew thicker again, and the genin all stiffened even more. A disembodied voice whispered, 8 choices, into their ears. The voice became more ravenous as it continued: liver, lungs, spine, clavicle, neck, brain, kidneys, heart. Sakura was all too familiar with those points. Places to strike for immediate death. The hold on her kunai tightened beyond what was necessary, and her breathing became shallower. Sakura knew Zabuza wanted to tear the flesh from their bones, and she could picture him sneering at them in her mind, his teeth so sharp, his salivating at the urge to strike. Sweat trickled down Sasuke's face in beads. His sanity was eroded by the oppressive aura of Zabuza's murderous intent. He took a few deep breaths, calmed himself, and closed his eyes just as he felt himself turning the kunai toward his throat. In a weak attempt to hear Zabuza's approach, Naruto directed a small amount of chakra into his ears. He could hear Sasuke breathing heavily, Sakura's kunai's slight tremors, their client's chattering teeth. He could just make out a slight shift in Kakashi Sensei's voice. If only he could hear Zabuza approaching. He felt it like withdrawal from ramen. When cerulean eyes opened, they saw Zabuza's left side from behind, his hand gripping the huge blade's hilt. When he saw Zabuza in a position to cut them all in half with a single blow of his weapon, he was frozen to the ground in a state of both shock and icy terror. Zabuza's movements were perfect and he had not made a sound. In her ears, Sakura felt her pulse thunder. She thought, her inner voice filled with fear, it was instantaneous. He had just shown up. Both Zabuza's right side and the beheading circle etched close to the top of the blade were visible to Sasuke. Clear as day, it had been laid out for them. This was what separated even the most talented green genin from an elite Jonin manslayer. They were incomparable. Tazuna and the recently graduated ninja were unable to determine who was struck, but Zabuza was struck by a flash of green and blue, and the other ninja fell in different directions. The 4 witnessed Kakashi's kunai pierce Zabuza's torso after they had all regained their sense of direction. Zabuza bled cool water rather than warm blood, in contrast to the countless individuals Kakashi has stabbed throughout his life. Just as the missing nin he had attacked vanished into a puddle, he sensed another presence behind him. Naruto exclaimed, "Sensei, behind you," instead. Kakashi hardly had time to look back before he saw his opponent in the middle of his swing. The copy ninja was cut like butter by the cleaver. Zabuza gave a triumphant sneer, until he became aware that he had murdered a clone. A clone of water. It isn't possible. Gazing in disbelief at the sprayed water, Zabuza pondered. Even in the mist, he could replicate it. A kunai moved under his chin, and he froze, slowly getting out of his slump. He kept the weapon at his throat. Kakashi proclaimed, "Don't move. You're finished." He held the kunai firmly in his gloved hand. The genin gradually realized that Kakashi had prevailed. Unconsciously, Naruto let go of a breath he had been holding. Then he smiled in relief and said, "All right. You rule, Kakashi Sensei." With a sigh of relief, his fellow genin stood as well. Zabuza laughed darkly, and the group's sense of relief vanished. He posed a rhetorical question, "Finished? By your crass imitation of my jutsu?" As the original Zabuza emerged behind him, responding to his clone, Kakashi felt the hairs on his back stand on end. "I'm not that easy to fool." Zabuza tried to cleave the copy ninja, but Kakashi's prisoner reduced itself to a puddle. With an audible wind, the blade swept overhead, and Kakashi skillfully avoided it by lowering himself to the ground. Silver hair fell in strands behind it. Drawing on his years of experience with the executioner's blade, Zabuza anchored the sword into the ground with his momentum before switching hands and pushing off the blade as he kicked. Zabuza's incredibly strong foot threw Kakashi into the air before he could even put up a good block. Though he cursed inwardly, Kakashi reasoned that he would have to teach Naruto the move using the clones, assuming they made it out alive. Zabuza saw the Makibishi spikes on the ground and stopped short as he jerked the sword free and charged. Zabuza leapt over the spikes and onto the water, sneering, "Trying to slow me down? Pointless." Sasuke tightened his jaw. He is proficient in Kenjutsu, Ninjutsu, Stealth, and even Taijutsu. What a foe it is to be up against. Kakashi came out of the water. There was no way he could get out and onto it. "I can hardly stay afloat because the water is denser than usual. Is this a chakra?" As Kakashi blasted through a brief string of hand seals, Zabuza materialized directly behind him, standing atop the water. "Hey, fool. Suiru no Justu." Damn it. Kakashi was encircled by a bubble of thick water. It prevented him from forming hand seals and limited all of his movement. Zabuza roared with triumphant laughter. He turned to face the shore dwellers and used an elite mist technique to form a one-handed seal. "This jutsu may be made of water, but it's stronger than steel. It makes things tougher for me if you can move, right? Now then," he said. Water near the lake's edge frothed and changed into Zabuza's menacing form, saying, "It's time to take care of your little friends. Mizu Bunshin no Jutsu." Sharing its creator's disdain for the gathered Konoha shinobi, the water clone looked down on them. "You brats think being shinobi is child's play. It is not a game. Life and death hang in the balance of your every action. Wearing your Hite.8 and acting like real ninja. But you know what? A real ninja is someone who's seen the line between this world and next so many times it doesn't even faze them. A real ninja would be in my bingo book. You're just a bunch of kids." Even though Zabuza trusted his clone, his words served a purpose beyond simply repeating the harsh lesson he had learned as a child. They would have already been killed if he had wanted them to escape. These were children. Not like the mistrustful jerks he was raised with. Even though he killed a significant number of them, at least they had some notion of what real ninja life was like. Zabuza had also been a punk himself, even though he had liked it back then. These days, killing children wouldn't be enjoyable or difficult. It had to do with business. They either died or fled. Naruto had been absorbed in his thoughts the entire time. When he was kicked into the air with enough force to knock off his headband, he was startled out of it. The clone stepped onto the Hite.8 and ground it into the ground, saying, "You're just a bunch of brats." On the ground, Naruto seemed to be cowering in terror. Distorted by the water, Kakashi shouted, "Listen, take Tazuna and run. You're no match for him." "I can't run away," said Sasuke, gritting his teeth. "There's no way I can fight Itachi if I can't even stop this guy." Sasuke charged Zabuza, hurling shuriken and kunai at him. Sasuke leapt into the air to attack, but Zabuza easily blocked them with his sword and kicked upwards to knock him away. Sakura caught Sasuke and sent him flying back. Everyone thought Naruto was in a state of shock, but he was actually thinking and had already devised a plan. He recklessly charged the missing nin. When he got to Zabuza, something happened that only Kakashi and Zabuza witnessed. Zabuza was about to punch him away when Naruto snatched his headband, which was no longer being stepped on, and pretended to hit him. He confused the Jonin by flying backwards and landing roughly on the ground. "You got guts, kid, I'll give you that." Zabuza grinned beneath his mask as he saw Naruto stand up while clutching his headband. "What's your name, kid? I want to know what to engrave on your headstone." While putting on his headband, Naruto muttered something that only Sakura and Sasuke could hear. He gave Naruto an irritated glare and asked, what was that brat?" "I said, I'm Naruto Uzumaki, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu." Suddenly, about 3 dozen shadow clones flooded the scene. "Let's kick some ass." They all rushed at Zabuza, ready to strike with his kunai. The original Naruto had remained by Sasuke's side, but the blade knocked them all away. Zabuza had intended to watch him, but he had vanished from view once the clone smoke had subsided. Rather, he chuckled upon seeing the enormous shuriken soaring through the sky. "Huh, you can't touch me with that." The clone just watched it fly past him on its way to the real Zabuza. His left hand caught it with ease. Pathetic. He grinned. His eyes widened in surprise when he saw the Fuma he had dodged transform into the original Naruto, who was holding a kunai. He had jumped to avoid the other Fuma shuriken almost immediately, saying, "I told you, you can't touch me." He threw the kunai and said, "Take this." In order to get away, Zabuza had to relinquish his jutsu, which he did. He did not anticipate the kunai puffing into a shadow clone, however. Zabuza had already released the jutsu when it grabbed hold of him. As he watched, impressed by what his students had created, Kakashi leapt away. Zabuza was attempting to beat the clone off of him, but it refused to break. "Get off of me, brat." Then, from his left, he heard a hissing sound. He turned and noticed an explosive tag on the shuriken's side. "She!" he cried, and then the shuriken and the shadow clone that was holding him exploded. As the smoke cloud struck a tree, he flew out of it. He tried to stand up, but he fell back when he attempted to push himself up with his arms. How could a brat beat me like this?" he asked. When he looked, he saw that they were burned, but not as badly as they could have been. Kakashi, who had mostly recovered by now, stood over him, ready to finish it with a quick jab of his kunai. "Momochi Zabuza, it seems that you're not as powerful as they say, being beaten by some genin." Zabuza went limp and appeared to die when two senbons suddenly impaled his neck. Upon seeing the newcomer, Naruto, who had just climbed out of the water, and the other two genin returned to battle stance. Kakashi simply had a cautious, uncertain look. The newcomer remarked, "Well, it looks like Konoha has some good genin then." She had the Kiri symbol on her forehead and wore a mask that resembled Konoha's Anbu, but it was not of an animal. She felt Zabuza's pulse as she leapt down beside him. He stepped aside to let her pick up Zabuza and said, "Thank you Hunter-san. We'll leave the cleaning up to you." Naruto ran up to Kakashi, prepared to attack the newcomer, and yelled, "But, Kakashi! Sensei, who is she? Why are we just handing him over to her?" But Kakashi shushed him and struck him over the head. This made the Hunter.nin laugh, and they quickly fled. Sigh. Naruto, she was a Hunter.nin of Kirigakure, essentially their version of an Anbu. Zabuza is a missing .nin from Kirigakure, and held secrets in his body. Secrets of their village that they don't want out. If we had tried to stop her, we could have started a war. Would you want that? Kakashi said. Naruto swallowed, wondering what might have happened if he had launched an attack. Naruto gave a headshake. Good, now let's get moving. We still need to get Dazuna to the bridge. Kakashi fixed his Hide.8 and gave him an eye. Smile. After taking a few steps, he abruptly passed out. Sakura shouted, "Kakashi! Sensei!" and rushed to him. He groaned as she dropped to her knees and gave him a slight shake. "Are you alright?" He opened his eyes, moaned, and began to laugh, but it quickly turned into a coughing fit. "Yeah, the Sharingan just takes a lot out of me. Could one of you carry me?" he said. They all sighed and hung their heads. With the goal of arriving at Dazuna's house before dusk, Naruto created a shadow clone to carry Kakashi. "I require a drink." First day. Kakashi was reflecting on the day's events as he made his way back to his apartment. "Well, I suppose I should put those two on my team." He sighed and said, "It's only right that I teach them." He turned around and let out another sigh when he heard a familiar voice ask, "Hey there Kakashi, how's it going?" He was simply too exhausted to handle Anko at this time. He attempted to move on, but was immediately stopped. "Hey, where you going, not trying to escape are you?" she asked, laughing in jest, and he laughed a little. "Come on, what's got you so down?" Kakashi rubbed the back of his head and sighed once more. "I'm actually pretty happy, but not to sound like Inara here, dealing with my team is going to be so troublesome." She took him by the shoulder and said pleasantly, "Sounds like you need a drink." He shrugged her hand away and tried to move past her, saying, "No thanks, I don't think that I have time to go drinking, I don't want to be too late tomorrow." She put her arm around his neck and pulled him into an awkward hug, pressing the side of his face against her bosom. "Nonsense. My friend, one thing you have to learn. There is always time for sake," she said. She released his head but immediately grabbed his wrist and pulled him to the closest bar, saying, "Besides, you finally passed a team, and that is definitely an accomplishment that calls for a celebration." They were seated in a booth near the back about an hour later, more so that inebriated women wouldn't see his face while he was drinking than for privacy. 2 more empty bottles were on the side, and there was still half of a bottle of sake. Kakashi sighed at his colleague's actions, having hardly had any to drink yet. A hand had been clamped over her mouth as she said, "You know, it's so funny watching them squeal. There was this one guy, I think his name was MHMNF. Kakashi knocked away his hand and said, "Shush. You're not supposed to talk about your work that in depth, remember?" She glanced at Kakashi and said, Whatever, I don't think that anybody that can hear us really cares. You haven't drank enough yet, you need more." She leapt onto the table and snatched up the bottle. He was forced to swallow it after she clamped his nose shut and inserted the bottle's mouth into his mouth. It vanished in a matter of seconds, and she released him while reclining in her chair and giggling uncontrollably. "That's not funny, unlike you, will be dealing with a group of kids tomorrow morning. What happens if they see me like this? He was simply saying to himself, I'll be setting a bad example. She paused her laughter long enough to say, I'll tell you what will happen. Sasuke, who I maintain is gay, and the girl will fall in love with you when they see you without your mask. While Naruto will crack up laughing. The idea of Sasuke falling in love with Kakashi suddenly came to her mind, and she burst out laughing once more. When she heard a thud, she snapped out of it and turned to see that he had fainted. Day 4. This time, Kakashi had decided to visit the bar. Anko abruptly sat down across from him after he had been seated for a little while. So, what's the occasion? She asked, wearing a broad grin reminiscent of Naruto. He handed her a small dish filled with sake and said, cheers, to the possibility that the Uchiha will see another generation. They clinked their dishes together and drank, with Anko pouring herself another round. 2 reasons. The first is that I was let out of the hospital this morning. The second is that Sasuke is definitely not gay. She snickered and said, so, after finishing another cup, how'd you find out he wasn't gay? Did you show him what's under the mask? If that's true, maybe he just thinks that you're ugly. Her cheeks were already flushed from the alcohol. She began howling with laughter and received a few glares from the other customers when she said, hey, very funny, but no, Naruto used a henge that made him look like a, well, coughs. A beautiful naked woman. He blushed as he recalled what had happened that morning and said, yeah, he did it to try and make it up to me that he was the one that sent me to the hospital. For several hours, they sat there drinking and conversing, though Kakashi stopped drinking in the middle. Kakashi only stayed to ensure she arrived home safely. Day 15. Somehow, it had become a habit. His team's stress was probably the root cause. He had significantly cut down on the amount of time he spent at the memorial stone and increased his drinking time, with Anko mysteriously appearing nearly every time he visited. In the end, he simply accepted his new drinking companion and stopped caring about her boisterous behavior. He gradually began drinking more, becoming more like her each night. Additionally, she had shifted from sitting across from him to sitting next to him. A young couple, who apparently did not see Kakashi or Anko, approached the booth after they had been drinking for some time. Their relationship would ultimately fail as a result of this. The girl ignored her boyfriend's and Kakashi's protests and began to fall in love with him after seeing his unmasked face. He pushed her aside and attempted to punch Kakashi after growing tired. However, Anko moved in front of him and grabbed Kakashi by the collar of his shirt before he could even touch him. When she began to smile at him, he thought he had struck gold. He looked down, took in her body, and said, hey, you're a lot hotter than my girlfriend. What say we go have some fun? He smiled her and put him down. But when he heard this statement, he hadn't seen Kakashi wince, and he wasn't prepared for what followed. She continued to smile as she gave him a painful knee and, before anyone could react, punched him, sending him flying through the wall. Kakashi, wearing his mask now, moved in front of Anko just as she was ready to follow him. In an attempt to soothe her, he smiled at her and said, okay, I think you've had enough to drink tonight, let's say we get you home. When she saw him crawling out of the wreckage, her smile turned into a frown. Help, that crazy bitch is trying to kill me. He screamed as he began to run after spotting her. She fought against Kakashi, who wouldn't let her go, saying, what was that? You'd be dead meat if you wasn't holding me back. After dragging her out of the bar, he apologized to the bartender and said he would pay the bartender back. She calmed down after they left the bar, but then she gave Kakashi a glare. She appeared prepared to lash out at him, asking, why didn't you let me teach that punk a lesson? Embarrassed that he made sense, she crossed her arms beneath her breasts and said, because, Anko, he was civilian, and you would probably end up killing him. She finally agreed to go to bed after some persuasion, but she insisted that he walk her home. Kakashi was just thinking, and Anko was still thinking about how she could have disciplined him, so they didn't speak for a while. You know, Anko, I've always wondered, but why don't you ever react like other women whenever you see my face? Was the question Kakashi chose to ask when they arrived at her apartment. He had been wanting to ask this question for some time, but he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. I guess, I just don't care what you look like. I mean sure, you're hot, but if that was all I went after, then I'd be married by now. I'm going after you for other reasons, she said nonchalantly after unlocking her door, then realized what she had said. Startled by what she had unintentionally disclosed, Kakashi turned to face her. Unusually, she flushed, and before Kakashi could react, she had pressed him against the wall with a kunai. If you ever tell anyone, and I mean anyone about what I just said, I'll kill you. Understand? She said with menace. Kakashi nodded and began to perspire. She kept staring at his eye, refusing to let him go just yet, and then she lowered his mask to reveal the rest of his face. Kakashi's eye widened as she kissed him abruptly, as though she was studying his face for the first time. She grabbed his vest and dragged him into her apartment without breaking the kiss, tossing the kunai behind her into the wall. After swiftly recovering from the shock, Kakashi took over the kiss by pushing her against her apartment's wall. Both of them were gasping for air, so they broke the kiss. Before straddling him, Anko pushed him onto the couch and hurried to lock and close the door. Before they kissed again, she shook off her coat and removed his flak jacket. In an attempt to maintain her composure, she grasped his head and drew it in her direction. They were about to resume their kiss when they heard a loud noise outside. Anko stood up and went to the window, rolling her eyes in frustration. When she looked out, she saw that some guys had gotten into a fistfight and that one of them had knocked over a trash can. Kakashi could see where her mind was going. He stood up to try to calm her down, but she grabbed the kunai from the wall next to her, threw it at one of the fighting people, and opened the window. All the guys in the group turned to watch it as it sped past his head. She screamed at them, "Will you shut up? People are trying to have sex up here," loud enough to cause all of the dogs in the Inuzuka compound across town to begin barking. As all the guys outside started laughing, Kakashi did a faceplant. When they noticed her bending the planter's bars, which she had never used, with smoldering eyes, they abruptly stopped. When they saw this, they all began to flee while shouting about a demon woman with purple hair. She snickered when Kakashi grabbed her from behind before Anko could pursue him. They're just angry because they aren't getting any. Come on, let's continue in an actual bed. He pulled her into her bedroom and shut the door after kissing her on the neck and getting a moan from her. Kakashi awakened with a splitting headache. He glanced around, unsure of where he was, until he noticed Anko standing beside him, clad only in a sheet. Not remembering last night, he sat up and began to perspire. He began to worry that she might have simply slept with him because she was intoxicated. He became a victim of his own thoughts as he began to consider what she might do to him when she woke up. Expecting her to begin strangling him to death, he jumped when he felt her arms gently encircle his neck. He wasn't prepared for her to whisper, "Hey sweetie, how'd you sleep?" in his ear in a tone that wasn't typically Anko. At her words, he sighed with relief, simply relieved that she wasn't angry for some reason. Holding his head, he turned his head and gave her a gentle nose kiss before saying, "Fine, but I think I had a bit too much to drink." Lightweight. She laughed, then collapsed back onto the bed, sleeping once more without even covering her upper torso. When he saw her, Kakashi blushed and hastily covered her with the sheets. After putting on his trousers, he got up and went to brew coffee. The sun was already high in the sky when he looked out the window after starting it and getting ready to take a shower. He had slept until nearly noon. Forgetting the coffee and shower, he hurried into the bedroom and hurriedly dressed. He only took the time to write her a note informing her of his whereabouts. Just as he was about to leave, he recalled his flak jacket. He felt Icha's recognizable form in one of the numerous pockets as he was putting it on. After taking it out and giving it some thought, he shrugged and tossed it in the garbage can. He could do it himself, so why would he read about it? Kakashi, who had fainted on the way home, groaned as he opened his eye. He stared at the ceiling, trying to look around, but the pain was too great to move his head. As he lay there, his thoughts turned to the battle and its aftermath. After almost an hour of contemplation, he heard the door open. When he noticed that he was awake, a woman he had never seen before approached him and grinned. "Good, you're awake. I guess that means I should get your students into Zuna." She went to get them and returned with the others in less than a minute. Kakashi went on to share his suspicions with them. "Okay, I think that we need to prepare for more trouble," Kakashi responded. Sakura inquired, "What do you mean, Kakashi-sensei?" "I mean that Zabuza will be back, and he will bring another ninja with him, most likely," he responded. "While you all performed well against him, next time he won't underestimate you." Naruto questioned, "So, what are we going to do about it?" "We are going to train, of course," Kakashi grinned. The genin took notice of this right away. Wondering how he could teach them anything in this state, Naruto questioned, "Train how?" With a smile on his face, Kakashi answered, "You'll find out tomorrow." Following this, the genin unwinded around the house and started to consider the future. The following morning, the team was in the forest, waiting for their sensei, who was moving more slowly because of crutches, and wondering what the training would be like. Upon his arrival, Kakashi said, "Okay, I think that you should work on your chakra control today." Sakura said, "How are we going to do that, sensei?" He smiled and said simply, "By climbing trees." In a slightly agitated tone, Sasuke stated, "We already know how to climb trees." Kakashi questioned, "Oh, can you climb trees without using your hands?" Naruto responded, "No way, that's not possible." Kakashi didn't answer. Instead, He just moved in the direction of the closest tree and started to walk effortlessly up its trunk. With a note of wonder in her voice, Sakura questioned, "How are you doing that?" "This is a simple chakra control and building exercise," Kakashi replied. Sakura crossed her arms and questioned, "And how exactly is this last-minute training supposed to help us fight Zabuza? We only won last time because of you guys. Any improvement on your part, no matter how slight, could tip the balance of the fight in our favor," replied Kakashi. They had all chosen a tree and were trying to climb it after a brief explanation. Naturally, Sakura moved more quickly than the others and made it to the first branch on her first attempt. By midday, Sakura had almost reached the summit. Sasuke had ascended several branches, and Naruto, much to his annoyance, had not yet reached the first branch. After lunch, Kakashi informed them that Tsunami needed to go to the market to buy more food for dinner, and Sakura offered to accompany her in order to keep her safe. She became aware of how depressing and pitiful the nation was as they strolled around. Everyone had a defeated expression on their faces, the buildings needed repairs, and the food vendors had very little food. Their spirits seemed to have been crushed. It broke her heart to turn away the majority of the kids who would approach and plead for food. As Naruto ate his meager lunch back in the forest, his gears were turning. Naruto stopped Kakashi as he was about to leave after their lunch, saying, "Kakashi Sensei, I have a few questions." Kakashi was drawn to Naruto's statement. Naruto tended to solve problems on his own and rarely asked questions. Kakashi turned around and said, "Okay, shoot." Leaning against a tree, he took a seat. "First, am I correct that experiences and memories from my shadow clones transfer to me when they expire?" "Yes, that's true. The shadow clone jutsu was originally meant for surveillance and spying. If they got caught, they could just dispel and send all of the knowledge they gained back to the user. Now, my other question. Am I correct that chakra control is more of a mental or spiritual ability than physical?" Kakashi didn't have to wait long to figure out what he was planning. "Yes, that's true. What are you getting at?" he asked. Naruto was smiling now, pleased with his epiphany. "So, can't I make a bunch of clones and have them train? Wouldn't that make this kind of training so much quicker?" he asked. Kakashi was taken aback because he had never considered that. Wide-eyed, he sat contemplating the possibilities. When Naruto waved a hand in his face to remind him that he had been asked a question, he snapped out of it. "Oh, well, I suppose that could work, but nobody has ever tried it before. Shadow clones take lots of chakra, and combining that with training can lead to severe chakra exhaustion, or even death. As soon as I said, well then, it's a good thing that I have so much chakra, isn't it? Kage Bunshin no Jutsu." A number of Naruto clones appeared in the nearby forest. He turned to face Kakashi, who was grinning. "Kakashi, I think that I'll continue working on my seals, while my clones train. Is that okay with you?" he asked. He got up and left Naruto and Sasuke to train after saying, "Naruto, I think that we may have just found the perfect way to train you." Sasuke had been practicing the entire time, only pausing when he heard Naruto creating shadow clones. Anticipating an attack, he prepared the kunai he was holding. However, when he turned around, he saw that only Naruto and Kakashi were out of sight due to the trees. Knowing that he should never let his guard down, Sasuke looked around and asked, "Hey Dobi, why did you make a bunch of shadow clones? We aren't being attacked, are we?" The real Naruto sat down and began working on a seal after exclaiming, "No, we're not being attacked, Teme. I'm just using them for training." When Sasuke realized there was no threat, he returned to his training. Sasuke didn't want to lag behind the Dobi, so he assumed that using the clones would somehow enable him to train more quickly. Naruto dispelled all of his clones just before sunset and attempted to climb the tree himself for about 30 minutes, modifying the flow with the help of his clone's knowledge. Sasuke was 3/5 up the tree by this point and was prepared to end the day. With wide eyes, he watched as Naruto ran up the tree, reaching 3/4 of the way before his chakra pushed him off the tree's trunk and onto a branch. Sasuke's shocked expression changed to one of disdain as he looked down at him with a broad smile. They arrived at the house shortly after, both of them exhausted, Naruto more mentally than physically, and both of them lacking chakra. Dinner was being served when they entered. "I want you to teach me the shadow clone jutsu," Sasuke said, setting down his utensils midway through the meal and turning to face Kakashi. With a sigh, Kakashi lowered his head and said, "You want to train like Naruto did, don't you?" Even though he was aware of the response. After Sasuke nodded, he went on, "Tell me, how much chakra do you think you have, compared to me?" He was met with a shrug. "You have, around half, from what I've seen, as you are now. All things considered, that's impressive considering you're a genin and who I am." Kakashi said to himself. Naruto though, has, alone, around 4 times as much chakra as I do. Kakashi sighed again upon seeing Sasuke's smirk. I don't think that I could even attempt to do the training that Naruto is doing. If I did, I could probably only manage a few shadow clones, and only be able to do it for maybe an hour, which would end up costing me training time. If I wouldn't be able to do it, then there is no way in hell or earth that you could do it as you are now. He concluded, glaring at the Uchiha, who appeared stunned. After being utterly perplexed throughout the entire conversation, Sakura finally raised her voice and asked, "What are you guys talking about?" Kakashi turned to Sakura, who was nodding in agreement, and stated, "Naruto thought up a new method of training that uses shadow clones to exponentially increase improvement rate. Because of certain circumstances though, only people like Naruto could possibly attempt this training method, those circumstances that I have just explained," she said, namely somebody with an ungodly amount of chakra, but it was more of a declaration than a query. Kakashi stood up, shocking everyone who hadn't even noticed he had eaten yet. To continue, "Sasuke, maybe in a few years, you could have more chakra than me, and then you could attempt this, but as it stands, you'd just end up dying if you attempted it." Apparently, when no one else was looking, he had eaten in between sentences. Before Kakashi could say anything more, someone else said, "Let him, he's just gonna die against Gato anyway." Each of them turned to see a small child that they had somehow missed earlier. The weak can't fight the strong, they just end up getting killed. Gato is strong, you can't win. For various reasons, they all remained silent. However, Naruto's outburst of laughter broke the silence, eliciting confused looks from everyone around him. "Hey kid, what's your name?" he asked as he paused, stood up, and approached the child. When Naruto ducked so their eyes were level, he retreated and said, "My name's Inari." Naruto was grinning the entire time and was about to return to his seat when Inari said, "Well, listen up Inari, because I'm not going to repeat this. Gato is weak, we are strong. Got it? Good." Inari screamed, "You don't know anything about us. You don't know how strong he is. What do you know about pain?" Which made Sasuke grimace, Kakashi flinch, and Naruto stop in his tracks. Naruto hurried back to Inari before anyone could stop him, grabbed him by the front of his shirt, and pressed him against the wall. "You're wrong, you're the one who doesn't know anything," he said in a calm voice, but you could see the pain in his eyes, just as Inari did, and the anger in his eyes. Despite Inari's objections, Naruto slung him over his shoulder and accompanied him upstairs, saying, "I'll be right back guys, I need to have a little chat with him." He trailed off as they heard a door slam. "That bad." Tsunami tried to stop him, but Kakashi stopped him, saying, "Don't worry, Naruto isn't going to hurt him." Naruto dropped Inari to the floor in his room upstairs. Crawling to the opposite side of the room, Inari was glaring at Naruto while tending to a bump on his head. Before Inari turned away, Naruto glared back at him for a few minutes without flinching. There was silence for a few more seconds before Naruto approached Inari and punched him in the back of the head, removing his hat in the process. Inari shouted, "What did you do that for?" and went to retrieve his hat. But Naruto grabbed it and kept it out of Inari's grasp. Inari shouted, "Give that back, it's not yours." In order to prevent Inari from taking the hat during their conversation, Naruto sat down and pulled out a scroll, saying, "Not until after we talk." Naruto sighed and put the scroll aside after rolling it up. Naruto questioned, "What makes you think Gato is strong?" Inari appeared hesitant to respond to the straightforward question, instead continuing to gaze at the scroll. "Take a look, you're not going to be able to get it out of there without my help or my friend's help, and I don't think they're willing. You better start explaining," Naruto said, tossing it to him. Inari sighed after studying the scroll for a few minutes and unraveling it completely without finding his hat. "Fine, if you want to know so badly," he said, tossing the scroll back at Naruto, who caught it with ease. He then proceeded to describe his father, a man named Kaiza, in great detail. About 3 years prior, he had made an appearance in the nation. Although he wasn't Inari's biological father, they were inseparable after he saved his life one day. Everyone looked up to Kaiza as a symbol of strength and courage, and he had a saying that went, "When you love something, protect it with both of your arms." But then Gato arrived. It had taken all of Gato's goons to capture him, even though Kaiza was the only one to rebel against him. To demonstrate to Wave Country what would happen if they attempted to resist him, Gato had Kaiza killed after fracturing, bruised, and tearing off her arms. Everyone retreated after the man they regarded as the Wave's hero died, and nobody attempted to stop Gato from assuming control. "He promised me he would protect us, but all he did was get himself killed." Inari, who was now sitting on the floor and leaning against the wall across from Naruto, was about to cry. The boy started out quietly before exploding, "Why do you all keep Why do you all bother to try so hard? It doesn't matter how much you train, you'll die if you go up against Gato. Don't you realize that, when facing the strong, the weak will only end up being killed? Inari sobbed, tears streaming down his face halfway through his tirade. Naruto turned away from the boy who was crying and gazed at the rolling waves outside the window. He approached Inari, who was still crying, and took a seat beside her. It would have appeared to onlookers that Naruto was going to put his arm around the boy, but instead he struck him once more in the back of the head. With a shout of, "Why do you keep doing that?" Inari stood up and gazed at Naruto, who appeared ready to leap. As Inari stood up, Naruto seized the front of his shirt once more and lifted him off the ground. In a fruitless attempt to get Naruto to release his grip, Inari grasped his hand. Naruto put his face against Inari's and remarked, "You aren't the only one who knows what it feels like to lose something precious to you, kid. My teammate, the raven-haired emo down there, his name is Sasuke Uchiha. When Sasuke was around your age, he lost his family," Naruto said quietly. Inari started, "Yeah, I've already told you, Naruto gave him a shake. "I wasn't finished, brat. Sasuke is, or should I say was, part of a very powerful and large clan, the Uchiha clan. When I say he lost his family, I mean his entire family, more than 100 people that were his flesh and blood." Which caught Inari's eye. He began to shiver as he considered whether he had lost his mother and father. He was there as well, he saw the devastation. "Do you want to know who killed them?" replied Naruto. He went on without waiting for a response, saying, "Itachi. Sasuke's older brother, the person Sasuke looked up to, had killed their entire family." Looking down, Inari no longer even tried to thwart Naruto. Naruto said, "That's not all." Inari turned to face him. Naruto set Inari down and leaned back against the wall, more because his arm was growing tired than anything else. Naruto turned to face the stars outside the window and said, "I won't go into much detail, because he's not willing to tell me much about it. Kakashi. Sensei, when he was just a little kid, his dad committed suicide. A few years after that, when he was just starting to get over that loss, he lost one of his teammates, his best friend. He won't tell me much about Rin, his other teammate, but I know she died sometime not long after, and he feels that he's responsible, and that he had sworn to his best friend that he would protect her. Then, around 12 years ago, he lost his sensei, the last person that he cared about." Naruto began to giggle. "I guess you could say that it's my fault that his sensei died. Kami knows you wouldn't be the first." Inari was now completely perplexed. "What do you mean? How can it be your fault? If you were even alive back then you were just a baby. I don't know you well enough to talk about that, but I will tell you this. Sasuke, despite the fact that his entire clan was murdered, was accepted by the rest of the village. They took care of him, gave him anything that he could ask for that they could give. And Kakashi, well, when he lost his father, he was technically already a Chunin, higher ranked than me. By the time he lost the rest of his loved ones, he was old enough to take care of himself, and was already a Jonin. He was respected by the village, and lived a peaceful, if lonely, life," sighed Naruto. "I wish that I had had their lives. Anything would be better than what I've gone through," he said with a sigh. Not because he was depressed for himself, but rather because of what Naruto had told him, Inari continued to sneer. "How could wish their lives upon yourself? I can't imagine anything worse than that." His eyes were fixed on him. "I honestly can't say, really, if I actually would be happier being in their shoes, mostly because my life is getting better, and also because I haven't actually lived their lives." "Do you really want to know about my life?" he asked, and went on after a slight nod from Inari, who replied, "My earliest memory was waking up one day to find I had been dragged out of my apartment by a group of men, who, for reasons I hadn't understood, were beating me and cursing me. They had dragged me out into the middle of the street, and I barely tried to resist, I believe because it wasn't the first time it had happened, and I knew I couldn't stop them. People walked by, doing nothing to stop them. Others stopped and watched, egging them on. Others joined in and started beating me as well." Naruto, who had been staring out the window, took a moment to process that. When he turned back, he saw that Inari was just sitting there, staring, and moving his mouth, but he was unable to speak. "Why did nobody help you? Where were your parents?" he asked, finally able to speak. "I don't have parents. Well, technically I do, but they died shortly after I was born, or at least that's what I've been told. If that wasn't the truth, then it wouldn't be the first lie that I was told by the village leaders." "But why were they doing this? You said that you didn't know then, but do you know now?" "Yes, I know now, but as I said earlier, I don't know you well enough to talk about it. Basically, events surrounding the time of my birth caused the death of an important person, who was also Kakashi's sensei." Inari, Beginning to suspect Naruto was being overly dramatic, remarked, "Well, being beaten is horrible and all, but that one incident isn't that bad." When Naruto leapt up and pinned him to the wall, those uncertainties were thrown out the window. That was not one incident, that was my life. Every other day, if I was lucky, I would either get beaten, chased, or harassed by anywhere from a mob of villagers to an ignorant drunk. Not only did I not have any parents, but I didn't have any friends because their parents wouldn't let me near their child. I would routinely be denied by shopkeepers who would push me out of their store before I even had the chance to ask for what I wanted. Some days I would come home to find that my apartment had been broken into, and I would be forced to wander the streets, waiting until the person left, which would sometimes take days. Naruto broke down in tears. The worst thing they ever did to me though, was ignore me. I would beg and plead, but they would just walk right by me, acting as if I didn't even exist. Whenever they talked about me, they never used my name, I was just, that boy. Do you know what it feels like to not even be acknowledged as a person? To be seen as something less than human, treated as a dog, a worm, just dirt to be cleaned off of Konoha's boot, regarded like I was evil incarnate. Naruto had given up trying to contain his tears and allowed them to flow. He was crying, but now a sad smile came to his face. I was shunned, scorned, beaten, and abused. You know what? I could have dealt with it. I could have been happy, I could have had some part of a happy life if just one person had cared for me, had acknowledged me as Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto killed him. The difference between us and you is that we continue to fight. We refuse to let what happened to us stop us from doing what's right. Sasuke didn't give up. He strove to be the strongest, if for no other reason than to kill his brother and avenge his clan. Kakashi, despite losing everybody he cared for, continued to protect the village his teammates and sensei had died to protect, the village that had driven his father to death. Despite being scorned by the village because of my very existence, I kept going, doing whatever it took for people to notice me. Eventually, I found people that I genuinely cared for, and I am genuinely happy, for the first time in my life. Images of Iruka, Tuchi, and the Hokage passed through his head. Then pictures of his team, who also held significance for him. The image of Hinata, the first person to love him, was the last one he saw. You are right about one thing, the strong do always crush the weak, Naruto replied. But your perception of strength and weakness is flawed. This Gato that you fear so much is nothing. Nothing but a worm. A parasite who feeds on the terror of his victims. The true measure of a person's strength isn't how well they fight, or how much money they have. No, it's the number of times they rise to their feet and continue on after being knocked down on their ass. Naruto replied with a broad grin. His hands were on Inari's shoulders as he knelt down. But, Dad didn't get back up. He promised to protect us, and he failed. He lied to me, He was true man, a hero who fought and died to protect those he loved. Naruto interrupted Inari by pounding his hand hard on top of her head. I can only hope that when I eventually do die, I do it protecting those I care for. Naruto ruffled Inari's head. At that moment, he reminded Inari so much of Kaiza, who had been in the same position as him and had spoken words of inspiration to him. Inari began to cry once more and leapt forward to give Naruto a hug while sobbing into his shoulder. Naruto pushed Inari away from him and held him at arm's length before saying, "Hey, Inari, listen." When Inari stopped crying, he wiped away his tears with his arm. Crying will only make you weaker, it will only make Gato stronger. So be strong, strong for your father's sake. He smiled and held out his fist, saying, "Hey, how about this? When we finally get Gato, I'll personally drag him over to you and you can kick his ass. Sound like a deal?" With a similar grin to Naruto's emerging on his face, Inari sniffed again and nodded. A chuckle formed in his throat as he extended his hand and gave a fist bump. With a broad smile on his face, Inari handed back his hat as they made their way back downstairs. Tazuna and Tsunami were taken aback by Inari's smile, as neither had anticipated seeing it for a long time. Grinning, Naruto took a seat and proceeded to consume his now cold meal. "What did you do, Naruto?" asked Kakashi, looking up from his book, bewildered as well. "I hope you didn't knock him around too much and make him go crazy." He looked up to see his teammates' disbelieving expressions, but he said, "Actually, we just talked." "Fine, I hit him a few times, but only when did something stupid." Kakashi gave a contented nod. "What did you two talk about up there? We heard a few thumps, but your team told us not to worry. He didn't hurt you, did he?" Tsunami asked, examining Inari as she hugged him, nearly crying with happiness at the sight of that smile. With a smile that never went away, Inari said, "No, I'm fine. Ni-san just taught me what true strength is, and that I should be proud of Dad." Tazuna, who was obviously intoxicated, wiped away her tears and remarked, "I don't know how you did it, Naruto, but you gave me back my grandson." Naruto rubbed the back of his head and remarked, it was nothing." They continued the training tomorrow, but there were a lot more Naruto clones this time. Numerous clones were scattered throughout the forest. The majority were climbing trees, some were tending to seals, and some, including the real Naruto, were engaged in combat. It was more of Naruto in the middle, surrounded by his clones. During the sparring, a new clone would emerge each time the original Naruto defeated one. This went on until lunch, which arrived through Inari. There were only 3 clones remaining in Naruto by the time he arrived. Unwilling to interrupt, Inari watched from a distance. Naruto was looking directly into his clone's eyes. While Naruto was new, Naruto was worn out from the continuous fighting. They faced each other, moving in a broad circle while maintaining eye contact. Naruto suddenly charged at Naruto, who sidestepped the blow with ease. After that, Naruto unclenched his fist as it struck the floor and kicked Naruto in the abdomen while supporting himself with his hand. Naruto seized Naruto's leg and drew him in as soon as he was struck. With his free hand, he swiftly snatched up a kunai and drove it into the clone's neck. Inari closed her eyes and winced, expecting to see blood. He heard a poof instead, and when he opened his eyes, he saw a tiny cloud of smoke vanishing. Without missing a beat, Naruto spun around just in time to use his kunai to block the shuriken that the 2 surviving clones were throwing at him. They dispersed and charged at him from both directions. With his eyes darting between them, Naruto suddenly leapt to his feet, causing them to collide. He straightened his legs and kicked both of them as he was falling, slamming their heads into the floor. When the smoke cleared, the real Naruto was seen kneeling on the ground and panting. Inari ran up to Naruto and assisted him in sitting down, saying, "That was amazing, Ni-san. I've never seen anybody fight like that before." "How and why were you fighting yourself though?" asked he. He got to his feet and replied, "It's called the Shadow Clone Jutsu, and I was fighting myself because I was training. Besides, if you think that was impressive, you should see Kakashi Sensei fight, he's incredible." He said to all of his clones, "Okay, listen up Mies, finish up whatever you're working on and follow me." They all said, "Yes sir." Naruto laughed and went to the place where Sasuke had been training. After searching for several minutes, Naruto was unable to locate him. He shouted up into a tree, confusing Inari. "Hey, Sasuke. Teme, you got to the top, right?" When Sasuke fell from the top of the tree, Inari jumped. Of course, it was child's play. He smirked. He gestured to Inari and said, "Whatever, lunch is here." All of the clones suddenly surrounded Inari and demanded lunch. With a sigh, Naruto let go of the jutsu. He was suddenly inundated with information from the dozens of clones, and he staggered backward a few paces before tumbling to the ground. He shook his head and remarked, "Whoa, still getting used to that." Naruto thanked Inari for giving him his lunch. Sasuke said, "I'm done here. I'm going to see if Kakashi Sensei has anything that's actually worth my time," as he stood up and began to leave after finishing his lunch. Soon thereafter, Naruto concluded, "You know Inari, instead of sitting here doing nothing, you could be helping your grandfather build the bridge. I'm sure you'd appreciate the help." "I asked Mom and she said I couldn't. That construction was dangerous and I wasn't old enough." Inari grinned and shook his head. "I also like watching you train." He walked over to a tree and said, "Whatever, I'll show you what we've been training to do out here, then we can head back." As Naruto ran up the tree trunk, Inari watched as he collected chakra in the soles of his feet. Halfway to the first branch, he paused and turned to face Inari. "See, I bet that neither Gato nor his goons can do this," he called down before sprinting to the top. After Inari waited for a short while, Naruto fell in the same way as Sasuke. As he got ready to create more shadow clones, he said, "You head on back, I'm going to stay out here and train. Oh, and tell Sasuke that if he wants to keep up with me then taking a break isn't a good idea." "Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu," he said, turning back to Inari. Suddenly, 100 Narutos appeared in the forest, and he began assigning them various tasks. He took the majority of them and began sparring once more. Naruto had taken all of his clones, including those that had been working on other projects, and was fighting them all at once when Kakashi arrived around dinner time. He's already beginning to figure out how to do that. Kakashi's eyes widened. After observing him for a while, he put Naruto's dinner on the edge of the clearing and walked away, proud of his pupil. "You're progressing even more quickly than I had anticipated," he thought to himself. In the center of the forest, Naruto lay on the ground. It was obviously late morning because he could feel the warmth of the sun on him and the dew on the grass. He heard wings fluttering and felt a tap on his forehead protector. He vaguely remembered someone standing beside him. The birds using him as a perch flew away when he abruptly reached out and grabbed a hand that had been reaching towards him. Opening his eyes, Naruto asked, "What are you doing?" A pretty girl in a pink kimono, a little older than him, was kneeling beside him. When he grabbed her, she had been reaching for his shoulder. Pulling back her hand, she apologized. "I thought you were asleep and was going to wake you up. It's not wise to sleep on the forest floor." "Okay then. Who are you and what are you doing here?" asked the man. "Wow, she's prettier than Sakura Chan," he thought as he looked at her face, blushing. She giggled at his blush, which spread. She got up and walked back to her basket, saying, "I'm gathering medicinal herbs for poultices and medicines." Naruto got to his feet and said, "All right, tell me your name." She turned back to him and said, My, you're eager to get to know me." She laughed again when she noticed his blush returning. He rubbed the back of his head and said, "No, it's not like that, it's just, I want to know your name in case I ever meet you again. I want to know what to call you." While still collecting the herbs, she knelt down and said, "Well, my name is Haku." He created 3 clones, each of whom went to gather herbs. "Here, let me help you with that, it will be a lot quicker if you have somebody helping you. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu," he said. Sitting next to the Haku, the real Naruto gave her the herbs he had chosen and inquired as to whether they were the correct kind. As he handed her more herbs, she asked, "So, why exactly did you decide to take a nap on the forest floor? It can't have been because it was comfortable. You know you could have caught a cold." He seemed pleased with his achievement as he said, "Actually, I was training so hard that I passed out. I don't have to worry about a cold though, I've never been sick a day in my life." I should probably tell Zabuza Sama, see what he thinks. "Really, not a single day? That is impressive," she said, truly amazed. "Anyway, why were you training so hard? Is it for a specific goal, or do you wish to be stronger simply for strength's sake?" she asked. What do you mean? Is there a reason you wish to become stronger?" "Yeah, I want to become the greatest Hokage. That's why I need to train, so the village will acknowledge me," Naruto replied. "For acknowledgement? I suppose that is a valid reason. I have another question. Do you have somebody precious to you?" Naruto said, "Precious? What do you mean? Is there somebody that you care for, that you would give your life for, that you love?" she inquired. Whoa, who's being a little forward now? Besides, I think you'd have a bit of competition." Naruto, misinterpreting the situation, said, thinking about Hinata and her feelings for him. "That's not exactly what I meant. I meant more like a parent or best friend." This prompted another laugh. He reflected on all the people who had shown him kindness and said, "Oh, well, I don't have any parents but yes, I have lots of people that I would die for." "I see. When somebody has someone precious to them, someone to protect, only then can they become genuinely strong," she stated, rising from her seat. "I think I have enough herbs for now. We'll meet again someday." She left the room. Naruto followed her gaze until she vanished. He was deep in thought when he heard a thump behind him. Naruto turned around and got to his feet, and Sasuke asked, "What are you doing out here, Dobi? Did you forget about breakfast?" He grinned and said, "Nope, I was training so hard that I passed out." Smirking, Sasuke remarked, "Hey, just proves you're weak. An Uchiha would never pass out from training." Naruto said, "Assuming the academy taught taijutsu stance, whatever, let's see you back that up. Come on, let's spar, I want to see what you've got. Only taijutsu." He assumed the taijutsu stance that most Uchiha had adopted and remarked, "Sure, I could use a quick warm-up. Besides, I don't need anything other than taijutsu to defeat you." The first to attack, Sasuke rushed in and feinted a punch, but instead he swept his legs in the hopes of pinning him later and finishing the fight with that. He was surprised when Naruto leapt over the sweep and gave Sasuke a face kick. Sasuke flew back a few feet after the kick. His recovery was swift, and he landed in a crouch. As they both went back to their initial positions, he smirked at Naruto and spat out a globule of blood. "Seems you've gotten a bit stronger. Guess I'll have to take this a bit more seriously." Sakura and Kakashi set out to find the two of them. Sasuke had offered to help locate Naruto, but he had never returned. Kakashi accompanied Sakura because he was afraid it might be Gado's doing and didn't want to take the chance of sending her out alone. But when he saw the two of them sparring in the forest, he was absolutely relieved. The only rule was not to seriously hurt your opponent, otherwise it was more of a free dot for dot all taijutsu match than a true sparring match. Naturally, this does not imply that they did not use shuriken and kunai. Although there were weapons all over the forest, if you looked closely, you could see that neither of them had touched the other. That's not totally accurate, though. Naruto's clothing was more ripped than Sasuke's in multiple places. Actually, Naruto had sustained a number of minor wounds, all of which healed very quickly. However, both were bruised, and more were developing. Sakura watched in wonder as they battled, asking, when did Naruto become strong enough to even compete with Sasuke-kun? Kakashi was merely grinning, pleased with the strength of his pupils. Fast but not really fighting, Naruto charged in and punched Sasuke in the jaw. Taking Naruto by the arm, Sasuke hurled him into a nearby tree. Naruto flipped into a crouch after righting himself in midair and pushing off the tree. He wasted no time in charging Sasuke once more, aiming for a punch to the stomach this time. Naruto continued to attack him with a barrage of punches and kicks, which required all of Sasuke's focus to avoid and block. Sasuke managed to avoid this, but he was unable to counterattack in time. He leapt away, seeing his opportunity, and reached into his weapon pouch. While Naruto had a kunai out and was ready to block or dodge, Sasuke was crouching and getting ready to throw his final shuriken. Naruto ducked to the right as Sasuke threw his shuriken. Sasuke had anticipated this and threw a kunai that Naruto avoided. Leaping to his feet, Naruto fastened himself to the tree behind him. In order to maintain his advantage, Sasuke started gathering shuriken and kunai from the ground around him as he ran through the clearing. He then threw them at Naruto, who simply avoided the projectiles by jumping from tree to tree. Naruto continued to dodge until he spotted a chance and seized it. With a kunai at his throat, he leapt down on top of Sasuke and pinned him to the ground. Check. Naruto began. He was grinning. Mate. Sasuke concluded, grinning confidently. Sasuke had a kunai ready to stab Naruto in the stomach when Naruto felt a tiny prick in his stomach. When they heard clapping, they looked up to see Sakura and Kakashi cheering their battle. As he approached them using his crutches, Kakashi exclaimed, "Well done. I'd expect nothing less from you two. It seems this extra chakra control training was actually worth your time, wasn't it?" Sakura walked next to Kakashi and remarked, "Yeah, they've definitely gotten better, but I'm not sure how what we did could possibly make you improve so much, Naruto." Naruto rubbed the back of his head and said, "Well, you see, I discovered this cool trick on my own." Sakura nodded. "You know how we can send chakra to different parts of our body for different purposes, right? Like send it to our feet so we stick to something and our ears to hear better." He went on, "Well, I figure out that if you send some chakra to your muscles, you can move faster and hit harder. Pretty cool, huh? I thought that's what you had been working on last night when I dropped off your dinner. You know, most ninja actually do that," said Kakashi. Deflated, Naruto said, "You mean it's not something new that I invented? That sucks." "Well, then again, most ninja that use it are chunin, and they don't figure out how to do it on their own, but are rather taught it," said Kakashi. Kakashi concluded, "So, considering that, finding it out on your own was impressive." Naruto raised his head. "Few actually master the skill, them being the current Raikage and Tsunade Sama, one of the Sannin. The thing is though, that doing it depletes your chakra levels. Are you feeling tired at all?" Naruto pointed to Sasuke, who was still breathing heavily, and said, "Yeah, a little. But then again I did just finish an intense spar with Sasuke and I haven't eaten any breakfast yet. Honestly though, sensei, you should be more worried about him." Kakashi glanced at Sasuke and then back at Naruto, who nodded. "You told him how to do it and he tried it himself, right?" he asked. "Sasuke, I advise you to be careful when using this, for the same reason you can't use the shadow clone training method. You have to get better chakra control and larger chakra reserves." Kakashi turned to Sasuke, who wasn't happy. "Just so you know, you don't really need to us it right now anyway. You were fighting on par with Naruto and you were barely improving yourself at all using it, while he must have been doubling his strength and speed at least. That's as impressive as Naruto's accomplishment." Sasuke's ego was growing as he smirked and turned to face Naruto. Hearing Naruto moan, Kakashi said to them, "Now that that's settled, it's time to get down to business. I'm happy that you two have been training and improving yourselves, but we have a job to do. After we get back and you two have had a rest and something to eat, then you're going to the bridge, while I train Sakura for a bit. Sakura has been guarding Tazuna since we got here, and, excluding the first half of the first day, hasn't had a chance to really train. If anything happens, send a clone after us, Naruto." It was Naruto's turn to protect the bridge's still under construction section. Making sure he wasn't in the way, he sat on the ground and worked on his seals, looking up at any strange noise or raised voice. About 30 minutes passed before Naruto began yanking his hair and shouting, "I'm bored," which startled every employee. When I said, "You know what, I've got an idea. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu." All of a sudden, there were twice as many Narutos on the bridge as there were workers. He looked at all of the clones bewildered as Tazuna approached him and asked, "What's the problem? You nearly gave all my workers heart attacks thinking that we were being attacked." "Well, I'm having some of these clones go on patrol. Wouldn't you agree that having 15 people watching for the enemy is more likely to spot them than just 2? Also, I'm having the rest help you with construction. The less time it takes for the bridge to get finished, the less time I'm going to have to spend guarding you guys," he said to Tazuna. "So, would you like around 30 extra unpaid workers?" Naruto responded with a confused nod. By the end of the day, they had accomplished so much that the bridge's estimated completion time had been shortened from a week to 3 days. That is, if Naruto doesn't assist for the next 3 days. Naturally, Naruto was affected by all of this because he had also worked, performing the tasks of 2 men. Even with his inhuman endurance, he was sore and tired from that and the hard training he had been doing for the past few days. He went upstairs and collapsed onto his bed without even bothering to change his clothes because he didn't have the energy to eat dinner. Naruto was still asleep when Tazuna and the rest of the ninja team went to the bridge just before 8 o'clock. After hearing how hard Naruto had worked, Kakashi concluded that he should get as much sleep as he could. They had just reached the bridge when they all came to a complete halt. The bodies of every man who assisted Tazuna in building the bridge were lying around. "What happened here?" he exclaimed as he ran up to one. The one Tazuna was holding exclaimed, A monster," before fainting. Abruptly, the bridge was shrouded in a fog so dense that they could hardly see one another. Kakashi pulled out a kunai and raised his other hand to move his headband as he said, "They're here." He then gestured for his students to form up around Tazuna. After 10 minutes or so, Naruto awoke. He glanced around and saw that their weapons were gone, and neither Sasuke nor Kakashi were in their bedrolls. Tsunami's humming was the only sound he could hear coming from downstairs. "Where is everybody?" he asked as he hurried down the stairs. Surprised that he was already up and about, Tsunami responded, "Oh, you're already awake. Kakashi said that we should let you rest, and he went ahead with father and the others." Naruto shouted, "I knew it, they left me behind," and hurried back upstairs to retrieve his ninja equipment. "I'm off," he exclaimed as he ran out the door. As he ran through the trees, he thought to himself, "Damn it, why didn't they wake me up?" To his right, he heard a mumbling and rustle coming from the ground, and he stopped. "What is that?" Sasuke had already destroyed the Zabuza clones that had surrounded them back at the bridge. With a smile, Sasuke asked, What else y'all got?" They were able to see Zabuza and Haku standing in the center of the bridge when the fog cleared enough. You think a little boost in speed is gonna be enough to stop me? Haku, show him what it really means to be fast." Haku bowed to Zabuza and said, "Yes, Zabuza. Sama. I warn you, I am exceptionally fast. Don't blink, you might miss it," she said, turning to face Sasuke. Inari heard his mother scream and a crash while he was in the restroom cleaning his hands. When he saw 2 big men with katanas holding his mother between them and dragging her out the door, he stopped running downstairs at the bottom step. Fortunately, they hadn't seen him, but while Tsunami was being pulled, she was looking into the house from behind and saw Inari. She stopped struggling, mouthed the word, "quiet," and smiled at him. He started crying as soon as they were out of sight. Inari lifted his head and used his arm to wipe away his tears as he suddenly recalled what Naruto had said to him. "Crying will only make you weaker, it will only make Gato stronger. So be strong, strong for your father's sake." What do you think your father would say if he saw you moping about all day? Determined to save his mother, he hurried out the door after grabbing a knife in the kitchen. They were already in the forest, but it only took a minute or so to catch up to them. Holding his knife, he ran at the 2 men and yelled, "Stop right there, I'm not gonna let you hurt my mom." Instead, Zori grabbed the handle of his sword and remarked, "Hey, looks like the little punk wants to die." Waraji pulled his sword out a few inches and said, "Sure, I feel like cutting something." "Ah!" Inari cried, aware that he would probably perish. Tsunami cried out, "Inari!" with dread at this precise moment. Haku and Sasuke had just concluded a fierce taijutsu match in which neither of them was able to win. Panting a little, Sasuke remarked, "You're pretty strong, to be able to keep up with Uchiha. You're not bad either, but I'm afraid this is it. I'm going to give you one last chance to leave and save yourself, even though I'm against my orders. You don't have to pass away here, so far from paradise. Like you can defeat me, huh? I haven't even demonstrated half of my abilities." As ice mirrors began to form around the Uchiha, Haku formed the hand signals and said, "Fine, if that is your wish." After the 2 thugs charged and sliced the child in half, They smirked and sheathed their swords, expecting to hear the sound of body parts hitting the dock, but instead they heard wood. They turned to see that they had cut a log, and when they looked up, they saw Naruto setting down Tsunami, who had fainted from fear, and carrying Inari over his shoulder. You know, you guys really shouldn't mess with the friends of a ninja, it's not healthy. Naruto grinned and turned back to them, saying, excellent job, Inari. I was able to rescue your mother because you diverted their attention. Hey, it's just the two of us against you, brat. What do you believe you are capable of? Waraji said, drawing his sword once more. In fact, I was informed that this child is capable of creating clones of himself. Nevertheless, Zori smirked and pulled out his blade, saying, but 0 times 10 is still 0. This kid can't even aim right, Zori said, pointing to the third that vanished into the forest to their right, as Naruto turned around with a big smile still on his face and reached into the holster on his thigh to pull out 3 shuriken. They were about halfway to him when they heard a twang from the area where the shuriken had vanished, and before they could react, the chain that the demon brothers had used flew out of the forest, 2 small weights on its ends, and wrapped around the two of them, cutting into them and preventing them from moving unless they wanted their arms and torso to be torn to pieces. I'm sorry it took me so long, Inari, but I had heard them walking through the forest, complaining that they wouldn't get to kill anyone, Inari said, turning her gaze from the blood dripping from the men to Naruto, whose face had taken on an expression of impassive frown. I set up my trap and waited, assuming they would take a hostage. In addition, heroes are always a bit late, aren't they? Naruto said, his large, silly smile coming back. When Inari nodded enthusiastically, he approached the 2 men and tied them up with ordinary rope before removing the chain. Inari, I'm a shadow clone, to be honest. On his way to the bridge is the true me. He went over to the water to clean the blood off the chain and then made 2 more shadow clones and had them take the thugs into town, letting the townspeople decide their fate. He sealed the chain away in a scroll, picked up Tsunami, and led Inari back to the house. I suspect that not only were you and your mother attacked, but so was the bridge, he said. The real Naruto had just arrived at the bridge and was attempting to make his way to a location where he could enter the battle and surprise the enemy. The bridge was covered in a thick layer of fog, which concentrated into a much denser cloud near the end. He was crawling along the bridge's side, using chakra to keep himself from falling off, and occasionally he heard the sound of metal meeting metal, concrete, or flesh. When he reached the end of the nearly finished bridge, he looked up over the edge and gasped, his blood beginning to boil. He was unable to discern what was happening between Kakashi and Zabuza, other than the sporadic flash of sparks, but what really infuriated him was witnessing Sasuke being slaughtered by a never-ending storm of senbon that came from the masked ninja who was darting from mirror to mirror. Even though they are more rivals than friends, Naruto had begun to view Sasuke as one of his valued individuals, someone who at least recognized his strength and tenacity. Naruto felt a surge of rage and felt power begin to flow through his veins. A voice inside his head said, kill her. Sasuke stumbled after being struck in the knees. She cannot take someone away from me, the voice repeated, she must be punished. The girl had a lot of needles in both hands, ready to stop the barrage, but it stopped. Yes, I must murder her. Take action right now, the voice in his head roared. She targeted the vital areas when she threw the needles. H-A-H-A-H-A-G-H-H-H-H-H-H. Naruto roared in the same tone and voice as the one in his head, making the bridge tremble and the air itself vibrate. He charged, not caring where this power came from, not caring if he hurt Sasuke on the way to the girl, just his anger, power, and need for blood. He charged so fast that he intercepted the needles and they bounced off and away from his skin. He raised a clawed hand and smashed the mirror that held the girl, preventing her from fleeing to another one. She flew through the air, skidding across the ground, her mask shattered into tiny pieces. Haku was amazed by the power that Naruto was displaying when he crouched on all fours, ready to charge again, and as he was about to do so, the girl looked up and looked into his eyes. He was faster than anyone she had ever seen, and he destroyed her ice mirrors as if they were nothing. Knowing that she would die, she looked at Zabuza, taking advantage of Naruto's stall, and was terrified by what she saw. Zabuza was motionless, restrained by numerous dogs, and Kakashi charged him with a hand covered in intense chakra. She charged them, determined to give her life to save her master, knowing that both staying and running would kill her. Before she blacked out, her final thoughts were, sorry, Zabuza. Sama, it seems I have failed you. I was not worthy to be your tool. Naruto was startled out of his reverie when he saw Haku charging towards Kakashi and Zabuza. In reality, though, all he saw in his mind was the enemy charging another of the people he cared for. He charged again, far outpacing Haku in speed, and hit her before she had reached them halfway, sending her flying. Haku's body flew through the air and off of the bridge, continuing for a while before making a big splash as it hit the water. She was unconscious and didn't even realize that she had ultimately saved Zabuza. Her body, flying from Naruto's blow, was sent on a direct path towards Kakashi as he charged Zabuza. Kakashi braced himself and ducked at the last second when he saw the movement, forcing him to stop his charge, which caused his concentration to waver, and his Chidori to fade. Zabuza stopped fighting the dogs that held him down when he realized that Haku, maybe the only person he cared about at all, was dead. He collapsed to his knees, his mind racing as he recalled the times in his life when he had been training and fighting with Haku. Those days were over. It's true that if someone had asked him who she was, he would have told him that she was just a tool that could be replaced, and he thought that if he continued to say that, it would remain true. However, despite his best efforts, Haku had managed to worm her way past the steel shell covering his heart and made him feel human, if only slightly. Seeing Zabuza's reaction to what had just happened, Kakashi called off his dogs and hurried over to Naruto, who was no longer worried about the missing Nin. Naruto had squatted down after hitting Haku for the second time, ready to attack Zabuza if he tried anything, but he stopped when he turned to see Kakashi. Kakashi grabbed Naruto and shook him, saying, "Naruto, stop it. You have to resist the fox's influence because you are not it. Don't let the fox take over and harm your team. Instead, keep in mind who you are," he said, staring into the red-slitted eyes with mismatched eyes. "He's okay, he's not hurt," Naruto thought as his thoughts calmed. "Kakashi, sensei. No, you have to murder the adversary. Keep going until you've taken a bath in their blood," the roaring voice went on. Naruto suppressed his anger and thought, "No, he has given up. I don't need to kill him. Is everyone safe?" "Sasuke!" Naruto shouted, his eyes returning to their usual deep blue hue, his mind turning back to his teammate who had been in danger, and he turned to see Sasuke lying still on the ground, encircled by the water from the now melted mirrors. Naruto hurried back to him and turned him over, first removing all of the needles that were stuck in his back. Naruto gave a sigh of relief, realizing that Sasuke was barely breathing, and began to remove the needles, but was stopped by Kakashi's hand. Even though they might not have struck any important areas, he could bleed to death if you remove them all. When they heard a pained cry behind them, they turned to see Sakura running towards them with tears in her eyes and Tazuna running as quickly as he could. "We shouldn't remove them until we can get him properly bandaged," Kakashi said, kneeling next to Naruto with his Sharingan now covered. "Please be okay. Sasuke-kun. Don't abandon me just yet." She knelt beside Naruto and yelled. "Sakura-chan, it's all right." Naruto turned to Kakashi and said, "Actually, I believe that I have something that may help." The blonde pulled out a slip of paper with a diamond shape and a few other markings swirling out of the corners of the diamond. "I got the idea from a seal that I've seen recently," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder in an attempt to reassure the kunoichi. "The person who has the mark on them is healed when the chakra is released from its storage. I'm pretty sure I've figured out a solution to that issue," Naruto concluded. "Normally, it takes a long time to store up that chakra, and it only really works when it's on a human. However, it can be risky to experiment with seals, Naruto." The Jonin was worried about his student but also shocked that Naruto had already advanced to the point of making his own seals. "If you made one simple mistake, it could end up harming him more than helping," he said. "I assure you, it will work. Don't worry. In addition, it sounds like he has a lung puncture based on the way he is breathing. He might drown on his own blood if we don't help him right away," Naruto said. Without waiting for an answer, he took the senbon off Sasuke's chest and took off his shirt. He then smoothed the seal onto the center of Sasuke's chest and took out a few more to put on his arms and legs. By the time he was done, the holes in his torso had already begun to close up, and the bleeding had stopped. The wounds were far from healed, and if he was moved too much, the bleeding would probably resume, but for the time being, he was safe. "Naruto. How did you get it to function?" "I added those extra markings on it, making it so." "I don't really want to know, it was rhetorical. I'm just happy that I have such an amazing student," Kakashi said, placing his hand on Naruto's shoulder. "I doubt I'd understand it anyway." "How touching, hey. I wish I had received that kind of treatment from one of my teachers, however, that would only have made it more difficult to kill them, hee." As the mist began to lift, they turned to face the end of the bridge, where an army of mercenaries and thugs had gathered, with Gato standing short at the front. Naruto stood up and glared at Gato, who backed away. "Gato, I'll make you pay for what you've done to this country." A voice next to him said, "I'm with you, brat," and Naruto jumped. With his arms hanging limp at his sides, Zabuza remarked, "I don't blame you for Haku. You were just protecting your comrade. I might not have lost her if he had sent this army with us. He went on, tearing the cloth from around his mouth with his teeth. I'll take on the weaklings. You go straight for Gato. Don't let him escape. Besides, I planned on killing Gato after this was all done anyway. He opened his mouth and pointed to a kunai on the ground. After understanding what he meant, Naruto positioned the kunai handle so Zabuza was holding it in his mouth. He drew his own kunai and readied himself. Kakashi was standing beside him, prepared to fight too. Gato retreated toward the rear of his army, now anxious. What are you waiting for? Get them! He cried. The three ninjas and the army charged. With Naruto approaching from behind and avoiding or blocking any attacks that came his way, Zabuza and Kakashi took the initiative and carved a path through the force. He knew halfway through that it was not going to work. They were too numerous, and the ninja were rapidly encircled. Someone who was going to cut Naruto in two was struck in the hand by a crossbow bolt that suddenly flew through the air. They all turned to see nearly the whole village gathered on the bridge, the majority of them armed in some way. Naruto saw his opportunity and created a dozen or so clones, who immediately began to rip through the ranks. Slowly, the villagers moved forward, menacingly. Dejected, the majority of Gato's army either threw down their weapons and surrendered or ran into the water. After slaying the few who were still resisting, Naruto proceeded to the end of the bridge, where Gato was attempting in vain to descend a rope ladder with just one arm. With a kunai in hand, Naruto approached slowly and said, "It's over, Gato, there's nowhere for you to run." Naruto hurried forward to pick up Gato just as he appeared ready to try his luck by jumping down. He made a path and pulled Gato back, along with anyone who stood in his way. Naruto initially halted at Zabuza, who was barely able to stand due to numerous wounds. "I can heal you. Just let me." He collapsed to his knees, tears streaming from his eyes, and said, "No, I'm fine with dying. I don't really have much to live for anymore. I don't think that I can really be happy now that Haku is gone." Naruto threw Gato in Zabuza's direction and said, "I can't let you kill him, but I can let you break a few bones. Other than that, his punishment is up to the village. I guess I'll just make sure that you can't run away then." Zabuza grinned down at Gato, who had just soiled himself out of fear. He got up and stepped forward. With a loud snap and a scream of agony, he stomped on each of Gato's legs, causing the bone to break. Zabuza collapsed to the ground, exhausted. "I wish I could join you, Haku, but we are destined for different worlds," he said with a satisfied sigh as he closed his eyes. "I promised you I'd let you kick his ass, didn't I? Go ahead." Naruto picked up the writhing, pained Gato and pulled him to Inari, who was at the front of the group. Naruto then dropped Gato to the ground and turned around. Disregarding the sounds of Gato's beating, he approached Sasuke, who was now starting to stir. He knelt beside Sasuke and studied him. Sakura had bound Sasuke's partially healed wounds using some makeshift bandages that one of the villagers had given her. "That girl roughed you up pretty bad." Naruto grinned and said, "You alright, Teme?" Without glancing at Naruto, Sasuke said, "Whatever, like you could have done any better." Kakashi, who was lying on the ground, exhausted, said, "Actually, Naruto was the one that saved you, and took out most of Gato's thugs." Tazuna approached Naruto and placed his hand on his shoulder, saying, "You kicked ass." "I did, didn't I?" Those around Sasuke laughed when he said, "Shut up, Dobi." Team 7 was getting ready to leave after the battle at the bridge a few days prior. Everyone had recovered, Gato was imprisoned, his base had been raided, and the villagers had received the fortune he had hidden there. Shortly after the battle, Zabuza passed away and was buried with his sword as a headstone in a grave at the top of a cliff close to the town. Additionally, they created a little ceremonial marker for Haku next to his grave. But above all, the bridge was completed. Not intoxicated for once, Tazuna remarked, "I'm going to miss you all. I had a super great time with you. Make sure to visit sometime, there's always a place for you." Naruto returned the call, saying, "Don't worry, old man, I'll make sure to write." After completing their first true test as ninja, the ninja set out for their village. Wiping away his happy tears, Inari said, "Hey Grandpa, what are we naming the bridge? After all, it has to have a name." As she picked him up, Tsunami remarked, "It should be named after our hero." With tears in his eyes, Tazuna added, "Yes, the Great Naruto Bridge, I like the sound of that." A strange thing was happening at a fishing boat several hundred miles away. When they found a person caught in their net, they had just hauled it up. They were swiftly removed and placed on deck. One of the fishermen exclaimed, "Captain, you're going to want to see this." Someone who was obviously the captain asked, "What is it? What did you find?" He approached them and noticed a black-haired adolescent girl who was drenched. The captain commanded, "Check if she's breathing, quickly." The sailors leaned over and put his ear to her mouth. She's not just breathing, she's mumbling something. What's she saying? She's saying, I'm sorry.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.